webinars, and we have been also doing more than 11 to 12 physical events. And our the flagship event is Connect Future Ready Leaders. Earlier it was in India's Vikasit Bharat. This year it was in earlier Amrit Kal. This year Vikasit Bharat. This year was a special where we had more than 100 speakers, and we also had a what you call leadership award. More than 32 leadership award. Half of them were women. Now we have been having a monthly this type of webinar. The earlier we did on the budget, and later we did that in the International Women's Day. And today it's a very hot topic and a very relevant topic: the impact of US tariffs, both on the world and on the India particular. So I'm very happy that we have very reputed and esteemed speakers. At the moment, I am happy to extend a hearty welcome to our Sanjay Mariwala, who is the president of Indian Merchant Chamber. And I'm very grateful to him that under his leadership, I also got the opportunity to work as the chairman of the Banking, NBFC and Insurance Committee. And in this year, IMC has done its flagship event, Bharat Calling, which was a very grand success, more than 2 days program. And our IMC president also led the Sustainable Summit. And IMC has been doing a lot of activities on the sustainability. Recently, we have done I think, gardening program in the governor's house, and our IMC has been appreciated on the Earth Day. In the Earth certificate also has been obtained. So Sanjay Mariwal himself, he is the also heading the chairman and managing director of Omni Active Health Technologies, and he has been a uh, member of the Government of India Task Force on natural articles. So he's a prominent figure in the industrial world, and in particularly globally also. And in IMC, we are fortunate in having his leadership. With this, I request our President Sanjay Mariwala from IMC to inaugurate this particular webinar, and he's giving his welcome or what you call inaugural address. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Narendran.
Yes,
this is a pleasure to be here and to interact with all of you and to talk about the hot subject of the month or the year or the day, as you said, about the United States action on tariffs, which is what is plaguing us all today across the world, and it's an enigma which we need to solve and find an answer to the issues in terms of what is likely to happen to each one of us and what is it going to do to our economies, our businesses, and our various stages or actions of various points of functionality. Some of us, for example, have children who might be studying in the United States. Some may have relatives who are living there and waiting for a green card. Some of them may have a green card and are wondering what happens, whether they're going to get a citizenship. I think these are all issues that are going to plague us and continue to affect us today. I think the question that was asked to me was to bring the issues out in some form to figure out what is happening and what is it going to do for us. I don't know whether anybody has all the answers to these questions, because these are difficult questions to answer. This is some of those are not in our hands. I think a lot depends on how the US government is deciding what they want to do and what they want to accomplish out of this program. The question that pops in my head is if I start with this, is it a well thought out strategy or just Trumponomics, which is arbitrary actions of a man? It's a question that has plagued me. Sometimes, if you think about this, it looks like a deliberate strategy that seems to be playing at it. Somewhere along the line, you look at it and you say, well, how can somebody be playing a strategy which is so irrational in some parts? So you don't know exactly what you are facing at the moment. But let's try and see if we can make some sense out of what is going on, and does it lead to something that will give us some clarity of thought. I believe this process, on the one hand, could be a very deliberate strategy, and I think the reason why it's required is um, what I think he's trying to do is to condition the American public to deal with the realities that they face themselves, which have been built over periods of time and over generations of being dependent on imports, depending, chiseling all their energies and going after developing one proper vendor around the world who can only deliver everything they need. And I think they have given that much importance to China in the past, and that is coming to haunt them today, and that's bothering them. But I think few people realize it to the extent of which they can make a difference on making some calls on this subject. So he's trying to wake up the American public, I think, in a way that they realize that they need to do something and bear a portion of the burden themselves by costs, inflation rising in the US, the costs going up, and somebody has to absorb them. And I think this is his way of telling them that this is going to be your fate. You'll have to deal with it. At the same time, there is a need for someone to take decisive steps here and make changes happen. If changes were to happen, changes won't be short term, because you can't make such significant changes in the short term. It will have to be a long term process that will unravel and hopefully lead to new ways of looking at doing business and living a quality of life in the United States. That will have to make some changes in their lifestyles and adopt newer ways of getting after this the shift that they need to make from China to other countries and trade partners. I think one of the lessons we have learned in the past has been, critics who have questioned Atmanirbharta as a mission of our minister, our prime minister. I think we will today just sit back and reflect in reality that being Atmanirbhar is a true mission that we in nations, sovereign nations, must have. And it's visible that you see India has done the right things in some parts by building their own capabilities in whether it's all steel or whether it's automobiles or manufacturing competence. Even defense, they've started building their own capability, and I think this today in retrospect is one of the most valuable decisions made, I think, in our nation. I think this is going to stand us in good stead, and it will be a useful way forward. I think the other point, one important point I want to bring out in this is what is this going to do? I think going forward, what is this US action going to do? First of all, I believe that one thing this is going to do is perhaps create 2 or 3 blocks in this world. This globe is going to divide into 3 blocks. There is what is called the US block. There is what I call the China block, and there is a third block which is called on the wall block. The nations that will sit on a wall and neither join US, neither join China will remain on the wall block. There are some nations that are stepping forward and looking at working, shaking hands with the US and collaborating and working with them and creating the US bloc, which will happen around the world. And there are some nations that will have no option but to truck with China for various reasons. And the Chinese are trying to possibly create their bloc in this process. One of the blocks will comprise of India, Mexico, Brazil, parts of EU, UK, and Ukraine. And I think it will be the prominent members of the US bloc, is what I'm sensing. I think the second bloc, which is the China bloc, will possibly comprise of African nations, to some extent, Canada, Vietnam, Southeast Asia, and Singapore. These are nations which will possibly be forced to be a part of the China bloc. And the third block, which is on the wall block, will be countries like Russia. Will neither be here nor there, but will remain on the wall and play their cards both ways and see what comes out of this whole situation. Perhaps Trump will succeed in maintaining large chunks of trade. You're taking the large chunks of trade away from China, which is his stated intent. If and this is in a sense an opportunity for a country like India. I think if India moves fast enough, we can benefit from this. At the moment, India is working very slowly. So I believe there is a need for India to change and make a significant change happen in the pace at which we move in taking over these objectives and taking this thing in our hand and doing something about it. Okay. The government is trying their best in negotiating and setting up the FTA with the US. Hopefully, that FTA will lead to something useful for all of us. But it's up to us as businessmen, as industrialists, as stakeholders of this globe that we need to do something about it from the Indian point of view, which is becoming unique and different in our offerings, going after maybe opportunities that India can fulfill and opportunities that have some risks, but taking those risks and biting the bullet for making sure that we have a shot at something different. Our private sector is today not taking the risk, is not investing in these opportunities, and is not grabbing the opportunities as we hear also from the government. The government also feels that very strongly, that I think the private sector needs to step up, needs to take some bites of this risk. See, there is risk in this because what capacity do you establish for what kind of products, which business segments do you want to get into, and which products will be able to completely deliver to the US are risky questions. But somebody has to take the risk at some point in time, and who's better disposed to taking risks than the private sector? And I think the private sector has to realize this picture and take the decisions to take some of these risks. The government cannot take risks like this. The government can only provide you an opportunity to understand the risk and do something about it. Okay. We are somewhere sometimes, as a nation, we get used to this belief that the government should support us in all the risk and give us some subsidy or provide us some cushion. I think those days are gone. That's not going to happen. There is a market and there is a business, and those two have to marry each other. There is no question of Sarkar stepping in between these two things and intervening and creating artificial props. So I believe that's the message I would like to make sure we take home as one of the messages. I think in the short run, we'll see suffering in the US economy. The dollar will get weaker. Okay. This will lead to interest rates rising in the US. Money will move from from US equities into maybe some of the other markets and/or in the debt market, so that it becomes more liquid and less stocks in equity driven. Okay. So this is US markets in turn will drop a few more points, and I believe that's is in store still, and we are going to see a little bit of variations in the market spaces across the world. New some new investments will take place as a subset of this action, and I think hopefully in India some of the investments are likely. If we take advantage of this, certainly we can get a lot more investments here. China will train their focus on non-US markets to dump their products. India could be one such market that they will target because there is no tariff challenges for Chinese goods in India, and I believe China has an aggressive pricing strategy as one of their backbones and their thinking. So reducing prices and dumping products is not new to the China businessmen, and I think the Chinese businessmen will resort to those tactics. We're going to have to be careful with that positioning. EU is another market which China will try to capture a much larger share of. Not that they don't have an adequate share, but I believe they will capture a much larger share of. because their attention had to move from high tariff barriers in US to low tariff barriers in EU, and also the ASEAN nations, which are already pretty large markets for China. I think they're going to try and take a much larger share of those markets. Mr. Trump wants to correct correct his low budget, his high budget deficit by charging import tariffs. This can succeed if he is able to negotiate with the majority of the countries, and I believe that can be something which is on the cards in his agenda. He is going to try and fix some amount of tariffs across every country. Perhaps people say 10% is going to be the base, and there will be other tariffs will be higher, and some of them will be between 10 and 25% somewhere. Chances are that even the 10% could be reduced down to maybe 6-7%, and that possibilities could exist, but we have to see what is considered as base level for them. I think we have to recognize that tariffs are not just tariffs between two nations. Tariffs are finally what that product costs to consume in a country where it's imported. So it's not just import tariffs, but there is also local GST or VAT or whichever terminology we use that helps the local government collect the consumption taxes. So those also come in the way of managing the cost of these goods. Those will have to be factored into their thinking also when they fix their tariffs. So these issues will affect the rate of tariffs for each country. If your GST is high, for example, on cars, India is one of the higher GSTs in the world at 28 or 34%. I think we will end up having a much higher challenge on what we're going to do with respect to negotiating reciprocal rate on cars, for example. In the short term, some chaos will prevail as the US market will see a disrupted supply chain, and that will create some issues. An example of this would be that we might be rejoicing that we have got away with 10% short-term tariffs right now as India. But the question now is, what does the 10% do? Does it mean that trade will flow effectively and continue to flow? I don't believe so, because you're not, US importers are not dependent only on Indian goods for their production or their supply chain and deliveries. They also buy from other nations. And some of the goods they buy from other countries like China would go into jointly putting Indian goods and Chinese goods together into some products that eventually get sold in the market. Now, if China is not going to be able to ship and is going to cost high, people are not going to buy that. So, which means that Indian goods also not going to be consumed. And if they're not going to be consumed, they're not going to build inventories until such time that the consumption takes place. So I think some amount of slowdown is something one must anticipate in the next maybe 3 to 6 months. I will certainly see a slowdown happening. Hopefully the picture will clear in 6 months' time, and the things will start coming back to some normalcy. But in my opinion, it will take about a year and a half before you really see complete clarity coming out of this set of actions. This is, US is a major economy, and we are dealing with the world's largest consumers of goods that the world depends on. Now, if they get a sneeze, I guess some of us will get fevers. Okay, this is the real picture as I see it, and I believe this is something we should brace up to. All of us will have to prepare for. It's kind of like what happened with COVID, when we all felt that the business is going to shut down, and we all fought our ways of figuring out what we're going to do with our business and on how we're going to cut costs, how we're going to manage our operations, how we're going to run businesses. Finally, we found our own formulas and made it happen. I'm sure we'll find those formulas here too, but it might take a little longer, is my gut feel. With that, I say thank you for giving me this opportunity. I hope these views were useful, and hope this stems well for your program, Mr. Narendran, and helps you conduct your deliberations in a more effective way and useful way. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. Sanjay ji, you have covered a very extensively also, and being a businessman and industrialist, having a global outlook, you have analyzed also, and in 3 blocks, and also you have mentioned that these things are likely to be remain. It may be the extent can be vary, but we have to adjust, and as you said, we have to be productive, we have to be competitive, we have to make our product unique, And with that, definitely, otherwise, as he said, US being the major importer and consumer, they can depend on other country also. So in that way, our Piyush Goyal Saab, our commerce minister, who is also our IMC very active member, Saab is negotiating with the UK, Europe, and of course USA. USA also, whether there will be an interim arrangement or a final before 90 days. And I am sure that way there has been a understanding and appreciation that it cannot be through subsidies and all. It has to be on their own competitiveness, which our minister has been mentioning. So thank you very much, sir. You have put up a strong foundation on the subject, and from here onwards, others know will take from the various coverage you have done. I am very grateful to you for your being our inaugurator, and I will look forward for our active cooperation in future also. Great, great, sir. Thank you very much. Now, yeah. Now we have, sir, our Madan Sabhanvis. He is one of the leading economists and from Bank of Baroda, chief economist. He has been a supporter of ENQUBE right from 2020 onwards. And in all our program, with a great heart, no, he accepts, because he is also having extensive more than 35 years of experience in the banking, finance, and macroeconomics, all that. And he has written so many books also. And his books are also highly appreciated. And he has been a regular contributor of article in our business line, business standard, and other leading economic times also. So he is an alumnus of the Delhi School of Economics. He is known for his insightful analysis on economic policies and market trends. With this, Madan Sabharwal Saab, आपका introduction, I am very grateful to you. So, because I know today is the banking working day also, that I did not notice. So you have kind enough to come from the our president IMC, whatever he has covered. From there, no, kindly take it up with your coverage of the subject. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Narendraji, for a very generous introduction. And good afternoon to everyone. When I look at this particular issue of tariffs being imposed by US, let's just get back to when this particular theory really germinated. I think it was the time of the US elections that Donald Trump had actually made it very clear in his articulation that if he came to power, he was going to correct certain wrongs which he felt. And the whole idea was to make America great again. So when we are talking in terms of make America great again, it's essentially a case of saying that we are going to make sure that we are able to shift production capacities in America itself and make sure that more jobs are created. So if you look at the entire ethos of whatever he spoke of, he had spoken in terms of putting some curbs on migrants, getting rid of illegal migrants, making sure that you have higher tariffs, and ensure that production returns to the United States. And if actually one sees some of the videos, which I believe are true, what was his articulation even in the 1980s and 90s, he had similar kind of thoughts saying that production had to be in America, and the fact that America was subsidizing the rest of the world was something which he was against. So purely from his own standpoint, right or wrong is a different case, but he has been fairly consistent in terms of the overall thrust of his policy. Now, the way in which it has been articulated, the way in which it has been implemented, of course, has been very confusing. So at certain points of time, we say that we're going to have certain tariffs on certain countries, then there is a deferral which takes place, then you have new numbers coming out. But let us look at it practically speaking. If the tariffs are increased, and America being the largest importer of goods, is it really feasible for America to produce all the goods internally? The answer is probably not, because I would say that if it was possible, America would have been doing it already. Because this is where we bring in the economic theory of comparative advantage, where countries tend to produce goods in which they have an advantage. So today, if they do not have an advantage in terms of producing textiles, maybe leather products, you naturally import it from other countries. So to my mind, while he has definitely spoken in terms of making America great again, to make sure that we have more production taking place in US, it may not be feasible for America to produce all the goods, and the dependence on imports is going to remain. So if this is a stance which we take, then the question is that by having these tariff rates, is it really going to benefit America, or is it going to only lead to higher cost of production, higher inflation in the US? So these numbers which you have spoken of, maybe a base rate of 10%, 26% for India, something lower for EU and UK, highest for China. Other competing nations for India, they get more than 26%. But at the end of the day, what's going to happen is that the cost of production is going to go up, the domestic inflation is going to go up, and that is something which is going to affect the US economy. So today, if we're looking at the first quarter numbers of GDP, I think there's been a slight negative growth for the US, and this is something which could get exacerbated. Whereas when you're talking of a situation of prices going up, the cost of living going up, there will be less real purchasing power, in which case there would also be a case of economic growth slowing down. So if you look at the estimates of IMF and World Bank, which came out recently, they've actually downgraded the growth forecast for the US, which is quite reasonable. So to my mind, this entire business of higher tariffs which America is imposing is something which is going to affect America in a negative manner, though it has definitely created a lot of chaos, a lot of disruption in the markets. And this is something which we are all seeing. Because Trump had also said at some point of time, he wants the dollar to be strong. He wants the dollar also to be weak because you get the export competitive advantage. So we saw the dollar strengthening, the dollar index going up to 109, 110. Now we went below 100. We're close to 100 right now. So I think the whimsical way in which the implementation is going on has created turbulence in the forex market. And this is something which has affected all the countries. It's also affected us. So today, when we are saying that sometime back, we were all forecasting, will the rupee go to 88 per dollar? Today, we're talking of 84, 85. So sudden depreciation, sudden appreciation. So I think this kind of a turbulence is going to probably continue. So I think this is one big takeaway from the world economy, including India, is that there's going to be a lot of disruption when it comes to currency, which means that central banks have to be more alert. Maybe this is a breathing space which we're getting until July, when the final decision is taken by America, because there are lots of negotiations going on, bilateral negotiations which are going on. So until such time that we know what the final position of America is, and of course there could be a further deferral, nothing stops them from deferring the tariffs for a longer period of time, but there's going to be disruption in the forex market. Now, typically in this kind of a situation where America is going to witness higher inflation, I think the Federal Reserve is going to be a bit cognizant of the fact that inflation is going to rise. And contrary to what the market normally believes, that there could be another 2 or 3 rate cuts, there could be a bit of deferral of rate cuts, because the Federal Reserve is not something which can go around cutting rates at a time, even though the president is urging them to do it, at the time when inflation can potentially increase. So I think this is something which is coming out from the US Treasury yields, because they remain as high as ever. So contrary to what one thought that the yields should be coming down, they've actually remained fairly intransigent in the upward direction. So to the extent that bond yields in the world are linked to what happens in the US Treasuries, we have seen that bond yields have also got into a phase of disruption. There is a bit of noise element out there. So currency markets have been affected. Bond markets have been affected, all on account of these announcements which have been made, and maybe the threat of potential action which could be coming in the next couple of months. So the question now is that if the world economy is going to slow down, the American economy is going to slow down, because trade definitely is something which is going to get inhibited, because as you keep increasing tariffs, there's going to be a lot of substitution taking place. Again, the ability to substitute, we should not overstate it, because we have seen that countries should be having the spare capacity to scale up. So while it may be very tempting for India to say that, look, we are competing with Vietnam, maybe Pakistan, Bangladesh, China, our tariffs are going to be lower. So therefore, we should be able to flood American markets with Indian goods at a lower tariff rate. This looks good on paper, but it'll be a kind of an oversimplification. To my mind, we'll have to see in case of specific industries in a position to scale up. Are you actually able to take the space which could be vacated by other countries? Because we should realize that besides the absolute tariff, there's also a case of how currencies move. So therefore, I think the focus a lot will be also on the Reserve Bank of India as to how will they manage the currency. Are you going to let the rupee appreciate, or will you let it depreciate to the extent? How much will you allow it to depreciate? So I think a lot of central bank action will also be involved when we're evaluating this disruption from the point of view of currency, and that's also going to have impact on bond yields. Now, next, in case we look at what are investors doing. Now, in this kind of situation where there is uncertainty, American interest rates remain high, there would be a tendency for FPI flows to also get whimsical, because when you're talking of bond yields being higher in US, it makes sense to probably invest in US. So that is something which we have already felt in India. Now, this could be of a short-term nature, but we'll have to see going ahead as to how the FPI flows also behave. So today, when we're seeing the Sensex going up, there's some bit of going into equity. Sometimes it's into debt. Sometimes there's a withdrawal taking place. So this kind of a thing is also going to continue. But typically, we should say that if US bond yields going to remain where they are, debt flows are going to be higher in the US, which means if in the overall case of reallocation of resources, emerging markets could be getting less. That could be another ramification of this entire thing. So then there's a question of saying that how is India positioned? So I think one thing which we have seen is that ever since US decided to impose these tariffs, countries have started talking to one another. So I would say that when what WTO failed to do, the tariffs imposed by US has actually made countries talk to each other. So everybody's talking with the US, we're talking among ourselves. I think India's also taken the initiative. We're talking to UK, we're talking to EU, which means that there is going to be a movement towards rationalization of tariffs. How severe they will be, we're not quite sure, but definitely we'll get to know over a period of time as to how much lower they will come to. So what would this really mean for India? So one thing which people talk of is, will our GDP growth get affected? Now, I think one advantage which we have is that India, I believe, is a domestically oriented economy, unlike the East Asian economies, which are largely driven by exports, which means that the domestic economy is going to drive our economy more than exports. So US is our major export partner. I think 17, 18% of our exports go to US. So intuitively, if there's going to be a fall of 10% in exports to US, there will be that much of impact on India's exports that could be affecting economic growth. So our estimate is won't be more than 0.1 to 0.2%. And right now we're talking of India's GDP growth being between 6.4 and 6.6%. 6.4 in case we do get badgered by whatever America is doing. Otherwise, we could probably continue on the path of 6.5, 6.6%. So that's one advantage. Now, the thing is that at a macro level, probably there may not be so much of worry because we're a domestic-oriented economy. So we assume that, okay, IMD said monsoon will be good, RBI is lowering interest rates. To that extent, we'll see rural demand coming up, investment picking up gradually. So therefore, we could see growth moving in the desired path. But I think at the industry level, I think one has to be a bit more careful, because while we are saying that the overall economy not be affected, the specific industries, the specific units which are dependent on exports to the US are the ones which need to be very, very careful. So actually, as being coming from the banking sector, I think exposures to these particular industries, we're talking of ready-made garments, we're talking of certain chemicals, electronics. I think these are the sectors which could be taking some kind of a hit if at all things do escalate. So I think at the micro level, the impact will definitely be there. At the macro level, we do not see so much really taking place. And another thing which we'll have to be cognizant of is the fact that the moment we start negotiating on tariffs, the tariff rates come down, something which Mr. Mariwala also spoke about. There are going to be the possible dumping coming from China. So we have to look at that particular area too. That not just from China, I mean, any country could be dumping anywhere else in case you're losing market share. So from the point of view at the micro level, Indian firms, ministry, everybody has to be aware of the fact, be more take a careful watch about how are the imports coming into India, whether that's something which is going to affect domestic industry. So that would be the kind of a real fear which is there for us at the micro level, both in terms of the tariffs, means we're probably losing some market to the US. And the second part will be in terms of possible dumping, which is coming from China, which could also be having an impact in terms of the physical viability of Indian units, especially in MSME sector. So this is the last part. So again, we're just saying who's going to be affected. Maybe not the large companies. They will have their own hedging activities. They will be in a position to go ahead and substitute markets, which they've been doing in the past. But I think the MSME sector, again, becomes the most vulnerable because we all say that 40% of our exports come from MSMEs. So if the moment I say MSMEs are going to get affected, and most of these sectors which we spoke of are MSME based. I think there could be certain concerns which, as far as the MSMEs are concerned. And I think this is something also which the government is cognizant of, and we've already seen. Or what we believe is that there is going to be certain action taken to make sure that we don't have this dumping. That's the reason why we're going with negotiations with these countries to ensure that we're able to blunt the overall impact of these tariffs. So if I could just summarize what's happening, what I've said, one is on account of whatever Trump is doing. Global growth is going to get affected. Markets are going to go into a spin. Right now, there could be some kind of serenity which we're seeing in the markets, but believe me, in July, when we get to know what's going to be the final action, things could again go topsy-turvy. Overall, macroeconomic growth in India may not be affected in a major way. 0.1, 0.2%, maybe 0.3% in a worst case scenario. But at a micro level, I think that's something which could be affecting, especially the MSMEs. So that is something which we need to be concerned about. Thank you.
Thank you, Madanji. And clearly, you have analyzed from your experience point of view and the macro and the micro aspect. And you also brought the fact that even though USA intends to improve their manufacturing, the current capacity and the current availability and also the availability of labor, all that, it is a medium term and a long term proposition. Of course, at the time he mentioned some $5 trillion dollars are awaiting for investment, but it will take time. So then naturally the China, as you rightly said, and others also, even Vietnam, all of them will find the way to see that how the export takes place to other countries, and India has the definite risk of dumping, and that will affect our domestic manufacturer also. And from the what you call the impact of the overall in Indian economy being it's the domestic oriented and having a good consumption and all that, and also the government focus on capex, the overall impact current year may be 6.3 to 6.5, and it is not that much great, but we have to be very of the futuristically how we will improve our overall competitiveness and our what you call capacity to cover other markets. But as we said, all these are not so easy. Every country will try to reach out. So that is also a factor to be done. And the my MSMEs, which have always an difficult period, there may be a necessity to give some support in the shorter term, but the overall later they have to also become self-sufficient to reach out to this market. And our overall efforts by the government to have a better terms and mutually good terms that will prevail. So thank you, Madan Sabanavis Sab, and we will look forward for your future also participation. Now I am very happy that we have another big treasurer and a country head. He was in the Bank of America, and my good friend Jayesh Mehta. He was always in a very knowledgeable on the bond market, fixed income market, or even the overall forex market, all that. And after successful stint, I think recently he has taken as the vice chairman of the DSP Finance, and also he has been in various companies as an independent director. So it is our fortune that from the businessman and industrialist to our current chief economist from Bank of Baroda, public sector bank, we are now looking at how the various global factors will wane, because Madan also covered there will be a currency volatility, and in a way dollar instead of strengthening has been weakening, and that will also affect our currency also. Similarly, if the bond price remains high in the USA, our even though Reserve Bank brought our interest rate by 50 basis point earlier, now the further cut may have an impact on our funds coming to India also. So all that we'll hear from JSG. It is now your turn, sir.
Thank you, Narendra ji, to invite me. As I said, I will leave the what we are going to import more apples or more Harley Davidson, or we're going to export more textile or more auto spare parts and pharma. We have a huge panel who can discuss. So maybe I will kind of go by two phases. One is a little bit of anecdotal, and then I'll cover a little bit on the impact on the market thoughts on that, all rates, effects, and equity, very briefly, simply. And then I have an anecdotal, light-hearted stuff, which I want, but it's also a point to ponder. So from that perspective, want to take all that accordingly. As Madanji said, making in America, even though investment comes, it's gonna take 2, 3, 4 years, right? But you still need your goods there. And I think Trump is smart enough to know that. But I think he went in his usual style on a negotiating table, right? It's like you want 100, you start with 500, start with a shocking number, and then you sit on the negotiating table, and therefore you can be one up when you sit on the negotiating table. But I think one big miss was when China put great resistance. Everybody thought China would, like, kind of, move in. But when China put great resistance into that, that also kind of gave courage to others to basically, ask their things as required, not to really just scream down to what US wanted. So at the same time, what is also happening is one more factor not really published well is like our Diwali, their biggest festive thing is Thanksgiving and Christmas, which is November and December. And just like us, there's huge shopping happening there, right? And that's where latest by May end, they need to give orders. Otherwise, your shops will be vacant in November, and that could really, really, a politically disaster from public not being so happy. That impacts public directly. The macro may not impact public directly, but not able to, it's like our Diwali, and you have nothing to shop around in the shops. That is something, and that's why they need to really get back into shape, get into negotiating table, which is getting delayed, and therefore they will encourage more. In a way, anecdotally speaking, we being the first one will also, especially in the current situation where they want to close it as soon as possible. Uh, they may give us some favorable terms so that it can show to the world that you come negotiate to us, and maybe you get some you know, favorable terms to be there. So India can really benefit on it, but as Mr. Mariwala also said, we need to be cognizant about the fact that there are challenges in India. He named some like GST rationalization. Even the yesterday's news on JSW Bhushan has also, it's not great for the business community or investment to flow in. That's something which we should really, really think about and ponder about. But most importantly, if we really believe that we're going to replace China on manufacturing, it's a really, really long shot. And, business people can confirm, but, what we hear from our friends in business, like we have great white collar, right? Our white collar is really, really good. And that's why, we have tech and now GCC growing at a faster pace. And that's a superb thing for India. Uh, the thing is, the good part is right now it's silent. It has said nothing on GCC or to that matter on the tech companies, and that was actually our turning point for our economy. If you really look at it, in '96 when we opened telecom, we got the tech guys in 2004, 3, 4 from moving from San Francisco to Bangalore and now to Hyderabad, Chennai, Gurgaon, everywhere, right? And that is the one thing which created jobs every year, year on year, right? Like almost like 4 million jobs every year. So that kind of numbers really moved our that 2004 to 7 India shining space and our consumption and our dependence on local economy, and therefore That is very, very crucial for us. That should not get disturbed. Otherwise, we will be a little bit into, will be into a lot of trouble. Also, if you really look at purely from three different markets. So right now, if you look at FX, of course, with this, there will be, we are going to see a lot of non-traditional things happening because typically you see that interest rate going up, people will flow to US, but that's not the situation. And dollar weakening is happening on two count, right? One is you see, we had a big incidence where there was a lot of distress happened when the Russia or Ukraine happened. People lived with it because you don't have any option. You don't have any options. You look at start with India to any other central bank. Uh, the largest exposure is to U.S. currency, right? And with that Ukraine thing, there was a thought in people that if we have something to do with our neighbors, and what if our reserves are frozen, or so that is the kind of worry which was there. And people were looking at BRIC Plus and stuff like that. But with the regime change, people thought, okay, we can do away, we can still live with US dollars for the time being, because you don't have any alternative as of today. If you really look at it, the other GDPs are not so great, large enough to absorb that. Maybe China can, but then again, nobody will really do China as a reserve currency. So from that perspective, you don't have a choice. And that's why what we are seeing in gold, right? That's the first rise which happened during the Russia-Ukraine, and then after this, it continued to rise because particularly central bank, if you want to reduce your U.S. exposure, if you look at like 10, 15 years back, we had 80% reserves, 75% reserves in US dollar terms, right? And the rest were in euro or yen or something like that. I think now the just guesstimate is around, we are down to 60, 65. We did increase, gold substantially last year, last 2 years. And just like us, every other central bank, but gold has a limitation till we find a new avenue to get that. But people are across the board, people are diversifying. Forget central bank. I can tell you our HNI friends in India, right, whose exposure through LRS was all US, now are diversifying into Europe and maybe it's a little bit on the Japan. So that's what the diversification is happening away from US, and that US exceptionalism which was there, and that's kind of thing. But having said that, maybe even right now, just like we have 60-65%, but every central bank in the world is thinking on that line that, okay, if not today, maybe 7 years, 8 years, 10 years down the line, we need to find an alternative. We cannot be bullied at any point of time. And it's a country sovereignty issue, right? And therefore they need to bring it down. Today you don't have choice. I don't know what happens. Maybe 7, 8 years down the line, you have some just like euro, some another currency coming up, maybe brick euro, whatever. It could be something different, or maybe the other economy grows large enough so that it can absorb maybe Euro, Australia, Japan, Korea, maybe, they can absorb other countries' reserve. So but thematically, people want to reduce the situation on US dollar exposure. And it's not only central bank, it is also, as I said, HNI individuals also. And this is happening. We hear it from the friends in India, and that's the same thing happening globally, right? They want to move away from US dollar, reduced US dollar exposure. Nobody can move away completely from US dollar, but at least reduce the US dollar exposure to a greater extent. And therefore, we see dollar being weaker. That will continue for the time being and maybe going forward. At the same time, if you really look at, as I said, it's very difficult to move your reserves out because that's a large money. There is no absorption, there is absorption capacity issue and stuff like that. What we have been seeing in last 15, 20 days, right, is a lot of sovereign funds and particularly European institutions, right? In last 8, 9 months, it was US exceptionalism. So you may not be able to move out bonds away from US to some other countries because there's no depth or there's no size, there are size constraints. But at the margin, what you can do is your equity exposure, which was there overloaded. People termed it US exceptionalism, like, US at 70% market cap of the world. And in last 10 months, everybody wanted to buy only US equity and nothing else. That is moving off. And that is where we are seeing on the equity side, the FPI flows in last 10, 15 days. And it's a consistent flow which is coming every day. And hopefully, I think it will continue to rise. It will continue to be there because, as I said, like if you cannot move away, you want less US dollar exposure. If you cannot do through bonds, then maybe at least the equity portion you can move out somewhere else. So that's what is happening. Of course, our local market after the March 2023 taxation on the debt side. Uh, there is no other choice, right? At 39% or the highest level of taxation on debt instrument versus equity, and the equity flows come what may. People thought like, market fell down where people will go away and stuff like that. If you look at the equity mutual fund flows, that is continuously coming. Even the last month, the flow was very robust. It was at the thing, it marginally changes by 3,000 crores on a base of 35,000 crores. It is good for media to write, oh, it's reduced and all that. But like, if you really look at it on a base of 35,000 monthly flows, if it's changed by 3,000 crores plus or minus, normal people would say yeah, it's the same thing, right? So from that perspective, the theme is not changing. And therefore, yes, the equity market looks very constructive. But at the same time, on the equity market, you have, as long as this tariff war, we already have 1 month plus gone, and the further couple of months will go. The global GDP will definitely slow down, right? While IMF is also given their forecast, but it's very natural. Any businessman would slow down his business when you have so much of uncertainty, right? And of course, people also on the spending and everything will kind of slow down, and that global slowdown on the GDP will impact the valuation, and therefore we will become overvalued or something. So the time correction and stuff will happen. So it's not going to be easy market. Of course, the flows are there, but at the same time, you might become overvalued. The good part is we will have large enough supplies coming in. You have LG already announced this issue. Of course, they have deferred a little bit, and there are a lot of new IPOs, new paper coming in. So that will keep the equities market in check. So just as I said, like FX, very constructive. It depends only on Reserve Bank of India that when they want to buy their forward, which they had sold to support the currency, whether they want to cover it now or later. Market has been waiting; they would come and buy it at 85 or 86, but they have been sitting very pretty and comfortable. And at some point of time, they may want the appreciation to stop. We don't know if that is purely on central bank to decide. But definitely, nobody's now talking about 88, 90 and stuff like that. So that's not happening. Uh, we are at 83, 84. Yesterday, we saw an intraday low of 83.80, which was very, very surprising. And then, of course, because of weekend, and again, our border figure closed at 84.40. But having said that, it is not that we are going to be any scramble on our currency and all that. If you look at our India macro per se, right? Fiscal deficit in control, your inflation is very much in control, more than is really supportive to us in big way. Also, lower crude price always supports us. India as a country, we are always happy when the crude prices are lower. Uh, so all that, the big macro picture is very, very conducive for India. So that definitely is there. Having said that, as Mr. Mariwala said, like, we need to see that pump priming right now. It's the heavy lifting or capex is mostly happening from the government side. Maybe once this thing settle down, I hope private sector capex also picks up. Uh, of course, when I say capex, it's not necessarily bank borrowing because you see, I think COVID to now, I think all of us have been there in this industry for so long. this must be the 4 or 5 year period where every industry got their shining moment for 6 months to a year, whether it is steel, whether it is automobile, whether it's real estate, you name the industry, they got their shining moment. And, people immediately just came out of COVID. uh, so if you look at the corporate balance sheet, it's very robust. A lot of people have reduced their debt to half, right? And that is a substantial saving. And so they can actually do capex, not necessarily always borrowing from bank, but they can actually do capex from the internal accrual. And as businessman knows that, it's not very easy to deploy more than 10,000 crores a year. But if the company is generating 10,000 crore cash, he does not need to borrow, right? So that kind of situation will prevail. So that is, I think, is very much into the fray. And most important thing, my favorite topic is on the rate side of it. I think there is definitely not only India, there's globally the change is there to focus on the local growth, local economy, local stuff. We were always local. At the same time, we have tailwinds from the macro side of it. Our biggest concern on inflation is fairly under control. It doesn't look like sitting today, it doesn't look like it goes anywhere away. It continues to be on trending line with our 4% target, and that's very, very conducive. But having said that, there are countries, even if it is your target is four and you may be at four and a half, five, six, four and a half, five, you will still try to focus on growth because now the growth has become priority. And having said that, if you look at it from the regime change recently, we have seen in RPI, like from January to now, there's almost 7,80,000 crores infused in liquidity plus another 125,000 crores. So it's almost like 9 lakh crore liquidity infusion which has happened. And May as a month, typically you have a lot of coupon flows, and now of course the dividend will be coming. So from a liquidity point of view, and especially in the last policy, very clearly just like old times, maybe before 2013, where central bank used to say, I would keep 1% of NDTL deficit or surplus. Then you don't need to go overboard on that, right? So, but 1% NDTL surplus is like 2 lakh crore surplus on a sustainable basis. If that is a said, governor did say this post policy press meeting. And I think that's there. We already saw two rate cuts. Mark is expecting three, four more rate cuts. I'm not too that optimist. Honestly, people have just told me I'm always bullish, but I think definitely we'll see a June rate cut. And I would say maybe August rate cut, 50-50 chances. And I think from that perspective, we will see the local pickup. Even on the regulatory stance, both SEBI RBI has kind of softened up from the earlier situation. And trust me, this is not only India. Every regulator in the world, every country in the world is actually now focusing on their growth. And that's why if you look at it, like, last year people had almost written off Europe, right? And like you look at the DXY DX German ETF, and you look at the defense, Euro defense, it's like really, really the best performing asset class for the financial year this year. Right? People have actually moved and taken over there. So I think, so broadly, you know, as I said, rates constructive, rates very much constructive, like a very bullish on rates that will come down and remain lower for a long period of time. FX, yes, we will see some volatilities, but it's not that we're going to be in a doom situation. We will be always, improving. Even on the trade thing, if you look at broadly, some of the items they want concession. If we give that, jokingly speaking, how many Harley Davidson or Tesla people are going to buy in India, right? So maybe we should go all out and at least support our exporters to get the right trade deal. So that should be. But as I said, like I would be focused more on our sector and our strength rather than manufacturing and competing with China and Vietnam. And I just wanted to. I love this anecdotal story, which is also kind of reality, right? And I just want to put it in a different perspective, in a lighter note, Narenji, if you permit. So, you
Yeah.
see, what is this trade deficit is talking about? Like we all are thought in the world, right? That as soon as your prosperity happens, the low skill job you outsource. So similarly, it's like, you know, if you look at our Indian household, right? So every household work was done by people from the house, whether it's husband, wife, and the family who do the household work. And as the prosperity came, that was outsourced to maids or household help, right? So are we saying we are running a trade deficit with maid or household help, right? So as you grow, you keep on moving out of the lower jobs. That was happening with US. That US exceptionalism was there, and we have seen 80s, and anything which is launched new, forget technology, even music which is launched new. It used to be there in emerging market in India 2, 3 years later. When it is off the fade there, it would actually come to India 2, 3 years later. I think with the technology and the internet, I think that edge, which always US had, that edge has moved. And that's where with the technology and somebody, and we all talk, we feel very proud in Bombay, but you go to the 30th or 40th city, they are also very much in the loop because of the technology, because of internet. The same way China. Today, China has actually, has given a run for money on the innovation side, right? While they are the lowest cost manufacturer, but you look at, the two big strengths, technology and auto, and of course arms and ammunition of US. But arms ammunition, I don't know about China, what's their situation, but I'm sure it's never spoken about. But if you look at technology and if you look at automobiles, right? There are automobiles, we just talk about BYD. I can give you 7 models on automobiles of Chinese make which are far superior than anybody else in the world. So I think, we need to really, really think that, you know, US either need to get the production back, but that's not really going to help, or they need to come out with some new innovation. But having said that, I'm just keeping fingers crossed that most of the negotiation will be completed by March, May end because of their November orders, which they need to give it to the manufacturer. So I'll just stop at the Narendraji, and thank you for
Yes, yes.
inviting me.
No, no, you have covered very extensively in a way. And this one important that how long US will have that reserve currency. And of course, their share in overall trade being in US currency also has been coming down. But as you rightly said, the other currencies have, except Euro and maybe some other like Australia or you said some of the Japan, all that. But the major one which we are seeing is going into the gold. India also recently announced the gold deposit, but there is a limitation. So this point, whether US also wanted their somebody that I'm not clear whether they also want their currency to little weakened or because that will help them in exports or that is also no, we were not sure. Somebody another also there is some due which are to be some maturing debt, which also they want. Powell also has to give a benefit of lower interest rate, which again he is a little unhappy with that. But as far as India is concerned, as you rightly said, there is still scope for reduction of interest rate, another 50 basis, some people say 100 basis. And particularly recently, Governor mentioned that international exports, there also our interest rate has to be in line with the international rates. Then there only for micro and small and all, there is a little talk of giving them interest subsidy or subvention so that their product will be competitive. But as you rightly you focused on innovation and our own, no, because the US as such has been pioneer there. But as you rightly said, China has taken over. India, I've been always feeling that our technology industries they are very good in giving this outsourced services, all that. But in terms of their cash surplus, they may utilize some acquisition, but they are not focusing on innovation and creativity. They are little behind schedule in getting newer products. So they are, as you rightly said, when they have so much cash, why not they focus? And even in the AI, of course, it is yet to be seen. The China introduced the open source, and USA is also a little surprised with their introduction. So in all that way, India will be a learning point and re-established in their supremacy in traditional industry, our exports, as well as the newer areas. And service exports also, particularly technology in the US economy is not doing well, then where they will get order. So recently, some of the companies' future guidance has not been up to the mark. So we have to see. So thank you very much. Your knowledge and other coverage has been very much appreciated by whoever has heard, both on virtual and physical here. And we have one more speaker here, Sandeep Parwal. You must be knowing, and all of you must be knowing. He's the managing director of SPA Capital Services Limited, and he has more than 30 years experience in Indian public and private markets, and he has been an investment banker. He's also focused on wealth management, and he's been tailoring and delivering a lot of high impact sustainable business advisory services. And he is planning to go for merchant banking, and even he's also working on stress assets and all. So I am also in a way connected with their company as a mentor. And recently in our that flagship program, Connect Future Ready Leaders, he has already seen that there is something going to be a big impact in the world market. And he says that all have to be little aware of that. And I'm looking for that presentation again further here, more maybe. But of course, we have to have a aware of the all that is happening, but we have to be also positive also. I'm always a believer of positiveness, and everywhere there is opportunity, and that only those who take the first what you call steps, they will be the winner. With this, I request Sandeep Parwalji to make your presentation. Come. Hi. Bye. You want to operate?
I don't know. I'm okay.
चलो भाई, उनका वो that
I'm
presentation.
good. Either way, I'm flexible.
He will help you later.
Your presentation?
DPT.
If you want, I can do that. Whichever way is the best.
You.
You want me to do this or
Please send.
this?
The audience won't be able to see the presentation.
Sorry.
The audience won't be able to see the presentation.
But आपको start करिए sir, वो आए आ गया
आ जाएगा।
Very good, please. You can sit. To operate, you can sit. Please start.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Narendra sir. It's a pleasure to be on the ENQUBE initiative. For whatever thoughts which are there, we can share. The purpose is today's agenda is related to the impact on the tariffs which have been initiated and maybe the reciprocal tariffs related to that. So,
Yeah.
what has been making news lately is related to the tariff headlines. While we are going through some geopolitical shifts and they have been enhanced with whatever has been imposed because of the tariffs. Somehow in last few fortnight week, we have heard about recession trends from multiple large global agencies. While de-dollarization has been a trend, but it is not that much of. Okay. So am I good enough? Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you.
Properly. Sound है ना?
Sound आ रहा है, उधर आ रहा है।
बात करिए sir.
De-dollarization has been a subject which has been discussed, whether in form of BRICS currency or alternates, but it has started maybe subdued currently for last few weeks, but it is not off the agenda. So that has been there. Somehow the markets have been fairly volatile. What we have been seeing, whether the international markets or the domestic markets, and in a contrary format in terms of whatever the movements have been there. Now, talking of tariffs, my concern is that we are talking protectionism again. And protectionism against a world in a world of capitalism. When we are talking protectionism, we are saying that we don't want the most efficient structure to survive or be the first preference. We want our guys to be engaged or my economy to move. We don't care where we can get efficiency somewhere else. It is for maybe protectionism for at the cost of trade disruption also, because I want to engage my people. And the other countries have responded it with retaliatory tariffs because they are not comfortable with whatever is going on as it is. This has already started triggering since what was initiated some supply shortage, and there are shelves which are empty in economies like US also. The geopolitical shifts which have distanced what US was doing with what the other leading economies have been doing, whether it is China, European, or multiple Asian countries, there has been a relationship which has been dented, and it is not as smooth as it used to be. The trade war and the bullying tactics of Europe or US have not been accepted smoothly, and there are economies which are aggrieved because of these functions. Also, there is a activity going on related to power realignments where Europe is distancing itself, the NATO is breaking down, maybe some inclination towards China and Middle East working out things together is shaping up and based on the energy flows, the defense spending, and other investment related opportunities. Talking briefly about the de-dollarization trend, so just now, more than the new currency, which what everyone has been looking at, perhaps will it be a BRICS currency? More than the BRICS currency, what I see is that there will be a different payment gateway. And it will be a China plus one, which was experimented at a negligible cost in a fastest possible time, which was, so I could have a world in a blockchain environment with the technology globally being accepted, where we could just have a payment settlement mechanism. And we could work in multilateral currencies. We could have multiple currencies which are being settled. I could deal with you in yuan and with somebody else in dollars and somebody else in a euro. And can we have that balance amount settled? Yes, we can have those things. Should not be very difficult. So we are in for a time with the way US has been moving, the global reserve currency has been moving, and with the history of global reserve currency, what you were just referring to, sir, that we are very close to a reset. Now, what form that reset will take place is not necessarily restricted to a new global currency emerging. It could be in a new global settlement mechanism emerging. So that's what I believe, and that's perhaps a likely scenario. The market volatility and the way the individuals are being or the investors are being taken to a sort of a uncertain scenario. While the recession and crisis is being announced, but the markets touch a new high every day. The way the global reserves, whether the Fed bank's interest rate decision or the escalation related to trade tensions, at times have played negative on the markets, but simultaneously within the week you will find them finding new high levels. I don't see a reason why that is being spiked off, why that volatility is being there, and how it could be emerging in such a crisis scenario where there is a war going on globally. There is uncertainty, there are trade tensions, there are tariffs. So nothing is certain, but the markets are moving high and markets are comfortable. I don't get why that is being happening. Over last 2 weeks, from a JP Morgan to a Goldman Sachs have acknowledged that there is recessionary trend. And with their acknowledgements in public media, things cannot be normal. The consumer sentiment index has declined, and even the IMF has reduced the global growth forecast. That being the scenario, the markets are moving up that apart, but certainly the road is not smooth. And as Jayesh sir just said, Madan sir just said, these are not smooth times, although they are not as volatile, but perhaps there is something uncertain over there. So for me, my way of looking at things is that tariffs is just an eyewash. Tariffs is not the concern. The concern is the global debt. The concern is the debt to GDP. I earn less and I spend more and I keep borrowing more. That cannot be the way. Less demand will and higher consumption, higher rates of interest, more debt printed, and more inflation, resulting to again the same structure for lesser demand because I have to pay higher rates. This cannot be the way this can sustain. We are certainly in for a difficult scenario and a different scenario where there has to be some sort of resetting. So tariffs is just one of the triggers. Like we had triggers related to global wars going on, the Ukraine, Russia, or maybe the Israel war, or even from a Bangladesh to a Nepal to a Mauritius to Pakistan now, everybody trying to engage India in war, which to my belief will not be there. I don't see India engaging itself in a war, but there's been nothing which has been left unturned or not being done to somehow enhance the tension and divert attention from the core focus, which is the global debt crisis. And the core focus remains on global debt crisis. And if I make some projections, and these are data which are from authentic sources, the debt is going to really escalate. You can't have 1% interest moving to 5% interest. Say the banker raises a EMI of a housing loan by 25 basis point, the customer is cribbing. You can't have the interest rate going 5 times. And then world running smooth and the equity markets going higher. No, I don't believe that. Certainly not. The primary concerns are liquidity crisis, which will lead to a credit crisis. There has to be a liquidity kind of a cliff where there will be no availability. We will have unrests because when these crises lead down to shortages, depressions, demands which are not being met will go up to hunger and food and other metals also, other requirements also. A lot of unemployment. There has to be a global reset. How fast that is happening, I don't know. But will it take very long? Certainly not. We are at the cliff. And can it happen faster than we anticipate? I see that it is likely to happen in that format. India's story stands fairly neutral. As was just said that while India economy is long-term aligned and with the right macros, in the right perspective, with the right GDP, minimal deficit, a managed debt, inflation not being high, the alignment is in the right place. It is the fastest growing economy in a slowing world. But can it keep itself apart or at a distance from what is happening globally? No, it cannot.
Yes.
The country has kept a sort of an non-aligned status with maintaining a neutral stance and stood still in the world, with is loaded with multiple pockets and a tug of war kind of a situation on all the fronts. How long can it sustain itself in that war? Perhaps the government is wise enough or the leadership is wise enough to do that. But can it be unimpacted? No, it cannot remain unimpacted in a world which is at a war trying to pull things on all fronts. So I believe that the long-term India story remains strong. With the current demographic position, I don't see anything going wrong. But will the markets remain stable smoothly? No, they are not likely. Dollar going from 88 to 85, everybody was looking at 90 and 100 coming sooner than later. We have economists on the panel, everybody understands RER, everybody is looking at that, okay, what is the realistic value? Dollar with its printing consistently, with a deficit, with a GDP which is in any case shortfall, and with a rising interest rate scenario. And now with the 84 level, the IT companies which are export dependent have lost their top line substantially. Their bottom line will be certainly impacted. That's a separate story that the stocks are going up. So there is something wrong being played out. Whether we call it a FI inflow or the options play, I'll not get into that. There is some derivative play related to it. My belief is that let's prepare, understand the situation realistically, realign, and focus on protection rather than looking at growth in this environment because protection will be more critical and maintaining ourselves steadily is more important in a world at war right now. That's all I'll have to say, sir.
Wait. Thank you, Sandeep ji, that you have been advocate that whether it is individual, whether it is a country, or whether it's globally, always borrowed funds are always there is a limitation to the borrowed funds. That borrowed funds also in terms of it is a domestically borrowed or globally means externally borrowed. That is again particularly for low income and less developed countries. If they have more of external debt in this volatility of currency, they will have a problem. In terms of even advanced countries, in the currently, this printing of currencies, it is not supported by gold. Earlier, it was through the gold standard. So that way, I think US Trump has all along has been that can we afford to have 1.2 trillion US dollar of this what you call trade deficit as well as the other fiscal deficit. But for the other country support in terms of what you call their placement of money, surplus funds in the US, that has been running. But in the current budget also, I think even though there have been focus on various others, but the efficiency of governance and reducing unnecessary aid and unnecessary spending and bringing some of them cut that is Mr. Our President Trump is quite aware that cannot go on with the type of fiscal deficit. But size of the U.S. economy that and the what in the current situation where there is a globally the funds are coming in a currency that has been running, but there should be a slight hesitation or limitation where which everyone has to take action. So that was the major one you have mentioned. Of course, these uncertainties also needs each country to see where are we, where we want to be, and how we should make it to happen. And luckily, India now we are only at 4.4 is the fiscal deficit we are expecting, and by 2030 we want to bring down the central government borrowing to 50%, which is also a very good sign. So we have been fiscal prudence has been our what you call our way of management, and we always believe a fiscal buffer also. Of course, even this fiscal deficit has to be brought down. With this, I thank you, Sandeep ji, and your presentation was excellent. Now we have very young and energetic Kanika Pasricha ji. She is the Chief Economic Advisor in Union Bank of India, a Union Bank where my erstwhile Corporation Bank also got merged. So 33 years in Corporation Bank, and Union Bank has been doing excellently well. And she has joined in since January 2024. But earlier to that also, she had a greater role in economic research and policy analysis. And she has been writing also and participating in various electronical media and participating with the senior economist also. So with this, can I request Kanika ji to make your presentation?
Yes, sir. Sir, am I audible?
Yeah.
And let me share my presentation, just checking if it's visible as well.
Yeah. It has come. It has to be white little, huh? Then you will put
Now
no.
is it okay?
No, okay.
Yes, yes, yes.
It is visible. Yeah, please proceed.
So, sir, first of all, thanks a lot for this opportunity. Really honored. Though when you start speaking after some, 4 to 5 speakers, most of the points are actually already done and dusted and made use of. But what I try to do is I will try to cover some points through the presentation and just put forward the unique ones which we want to convey through the same. So, just starting with and just have 4 to 5 key slides to cover. And we'll first refer to what Mr. Mariwala talked about, that of course for US, hope these slides are clearly visible. Just checking again. Yeah. So just on how the global landscape is panning out, because what we thought is we recently released a report as well, and this is something which Mr. Mariwala beautifully explained, is that basic impact of Trump 2.0, not just on India, but on the world, will be how the global trade chessboard will shift. And who will be on the US side, who will be on the China side. In fact, I saw one of the comments on chat that where will EU actually tilt towards China, towards US, or make its own bloc? Because they are also in for a structural shift after Trump 2.0. So quickly, if we start, we just come to that chessboard. But before that, let's just take, a step back. Um, of course, there's been a lot talked about. US has the greatest trade deficit with China. The chart on the right. In fact, they're not just trading. They're not just clocking a trade deficit with China. Also, another round, that's a direct trade deficit, but indirectly also. So $295 billion is annual trade deficit that US clocks with China. But other countries, especially Vietnam and Mexico, which have high dependence on China in terms of or in terms of imports, this re-exports via China through Vietnam and Mexico happening to the US, and they also account for another $295 billion of trade deficit that US has with these countries, 172 with Mexico, 123 with Vietnam. That's the scale and scope of the way world has structured itself, because China, when it joined the WTO in 2001, before that in 2000, can you imagine China's total trade surplus with the world? A world deficit with China was just $250 billion. Today it's increased to $3.6 trillion. That's the kind of exports China is doing to the world. And the kind of momentum that it has built up as a manufacturing powerhouse over the last few decades. In fact, India in this global chessboard for trade is so muted, and specifically from US perspective is relatively muted, because in US exports, India's uh, so in exports, India's share is 2%, and in US imports, India's share is 2.7%. So then it becomes important that how India will play the global chessboard. And we just take 1 minute to understand what we are trying to say in this slide. And it has some interesting conclusions. We read this slide horizontally. So the chart on the table on the left-hand side shows that in terms of percentage share in total exports for US in its total exports, China's share is 7.3%, while 18.3%. While in total imports for US first, China's share is 14.1%. India, as I stated, is relatively muted at 2.8%, while ASEAN is 10.1% and EU is 18.6%. Now, very, very interesting stat if I just get down to India. Because, as Mr. Mariwala was talking about, there are so many interlinkages within countries. And, China has been very smart. Over the last 10 years, 10 to 15 years, they have tried to build their supply chain away from the US towards other economies, other country groups. Like if you see China, the share in China's total exports, US is 14.8, but the share for ASEAN is equivalent or slightly higher at 15.5, while EU also stands at 14.8. Now, when US share for China, so in China's total exports, if share of US falls from 14.8, to which segment does it move? Whether it moves to India, Japan, ASEAN, EU, UK, or even Latin America, Africa, GCC, the country groups we would not try to cover here, just to keep it simple in terms of discussion. And that will see, so how the chessboard moves in terms of how this 14.8 moves towards other segments is key. And that is the kind of concern that even Madan Sabnavis was talking about in terms of the dumping effects. But quickly on India, because the trade deals, the way they'll be forged, will be key to define how this chessboard plays out. And that will be the driver of global trade, macro, flow, and overall policy dynamics that we're talking about today. So, just coming to India then, very, very interesting stat. And this is what we would want to highlight, something different that, apart from the detailed discussion already covered by all other panelists. See, if you look at India's total exports, this line, in India's exports, US share is 17.6%, so close to 18%. Of course, EU is also 17.5%, so around another 18%. But in total imports for India, China's share is 18%. So if India is exporting 18% of its products to the US, it's also importing 18% of the required raw materials, other segments from China as well. And that got us very intrigued to understand, is there any backward supply chain integration that we have with China, where we also need to be careful? Because yes, India may be one of the first few countries to sign a trade deal with US, but we need to be equally cognizant about our geopolitical relationship with China and the tension at the border with China supporting our neighbor at the current juncture. That is also under threat and needs to be closely watched out for. Apart from, of course, the other threats of dumping, which of course is a threat not just for India, but the entire Asian space. So then in this regard, we thought that, okay, what will be very important to understand is that what is China and US role in India's trade dynamics, and which are the sectors that need to be watched. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty. Which way US will also slip, like Mr. Jayesh Mehta was talking about. Trump is, is an astute businessman. He's trying to negotiate. So initially he started with 145. Actually, it was 245 with China. He's come down to 145, but they're trying to negotiate a trade deal with China as well, apart from other countries. So which way the tables will turn needs to be very, very closely watched. And that is a key source of uncertainty. But the second source of uncertainty, purely from India's perspective, apart from the fact that where is the role India will play in that global chessboard, is it how sector-wise impact will play out and how the relationship for India with China plays out. So let's spend a minute on this slide as well. And this got us very intrigued that this is India's trade balance country-wise. And see, China and US are at the two ends of spectrum for India as well. India has almost $100 billion of trade deficit with China, while around, the number is actually around $30-40 billion of trade surplus with the US. So it's important to note today, US is creating so much of fuss for having a $290 billion trade deficit with China. India also has close to $100 billion trade deficit with China. We're equally dependent, which is why how our dynamics play out with China on the geopolitical front and also on the exchange rate front, how CNY plays out, because till now it's only trade war and no FX war. So quickly on the sector wise, what we then try to do is to understand that, okay, I think Adhish Verma from my friend from CRISIL will cover this in detail because we got this snapshot. But just a minute on what we are trying to do over here is these are the key India exports to the US. And of course, there will be it pharma, textiles, gems and jewelry, smartphones, auto, chemicals, metals, and even agri. And their dependence for the sector in terms of exports, US share in exports is also quite elevated, specifically in sectors like pharma, textiles, gems and jewelry, even photovoltaics. So that's very important to note. And of course, the impact. Just 2-3 key points to note where our supply chain is highly linked with China. Pharmaceuticals. Active pharmaceutical ingredient, a key raw material in pharma, 90% of that we import from China. Smartphones. Actually, the kind of supply chain we have from China for electronics, where of course today Tim Cook from Apple is talking about having majority of made in India iPhones in the coming years, and they want to double up their production of iPhones in the by 2026 itself from current levels. But what is very important to note is the basic part of a smartphone, which is a chip, and some other parts are still made in China, which is why they still account for 80-85% of global production of that iPhone. So how that backward integration of supply chain with China plays out here becomes important. Let's look at other segments as well, like steel. While of course government is trying to protect the sector via anti-dumping duties, not just steel, even aluminium, but we still have a large part, a significant part of steel imports coming from China. And same is true even for auto components, chemicals here and there. So then the key question remains how our relationship gets um, gets elaborated with China becomes very important. Of course, there are some very good examples right now. And what Mr. Mariwala talked about was a beautiful point that we, our private sector in India, which has not been investing on a broad basis. We just keep talking about a K-shaped recovery. For last 5 to 7 years now, they need to buck up and make use of these opportunities which are coming up. And we are hearing all sorts of anecdotes. Like Apple, we also heard about Alphabet. They want to shift their supply chain away from Vietnam towards India. Samsung, which is very big in Vietnam, they are considering shifting some part of supply chain from Vietnam to India. I was really amazed to read, even in textiles, where, of course, textiles we may benefit, and it is a very big opportunity for us. But MSMEs may not benefit because what we are hearing is that in that 10% tariff hike, the US companies are asking for equal burden sharing for the companies in India as well. And a 5% price hike for an MSME in India or a price absorption for an MSME in India with a slow margin is not very easy. So textiles, the opportunity is limited to only few segments, but still we are hearing that in Tirupur, which is the largest knitwear segment for India, and I think it's one of the largest in Asia as well, 10% of Chinese orders have shifted towards India from US already. We are hearing BYD, and I was completely amazed to read that news. BYD is planning to is planning to set up its first manufacturing plant in India. So we are hearing a lot of company specific anecdotes where India is likely to reap the opportunity of this trade war between US and China. There are very, very positive areas as well, but we all know that India is still not a manufacturing hub. So how we make use of the opportunity, like Mr. Mehta said, we still have IGST, we have land labor reforms, still not broad-based or not clearly defined. That's still work in progress. So manufacturing still stands at 17-18% of GDP. We are yet to see manufacturing blow up happen in India, the kind of Make in India initiative the government had. Yes, it's happening in few sectors. It's a company specific story. It's important to move to a sector specific story here. Only if it happens, we will be saying that India's reaped this opportunity and made a place for itself in the global trade chessboard. Has it happened now? The answer is no. It's work in progress, but let's closely watch for the positive news as well. But still very, very sector specific and company specific in our view. Now, of course, the other part of impact on India and the world is the channel of impact is flows, and a lot has been talked about. I'll just make 2 to 3 key points here and what we are watching out from Indian markets perspective. So, of course, the investment banks of the world are looking at, and, I think Sanjeev talked about it in much detail. But just 2, 3 points is that if you look at global investors not shunning away US assets, because we still have dollar hegemony. It will be difficult to find an alternative to dollar in an uncertain world, but policy flip-flops from US administration has made some investors move away, specifically hedge funds, not ETFs, but hedge funds, move away from US assets. So the table on the right just talks about how the flows are panning out in US on a weekly average basis in recent weeks compared to 2024 average. So money is moving from US equities debt towards European equities, Japanese equities. But what we would watch out for is when money starts to come to EM equities and bonds. When it's coming, when it is about India, in recent weeks, last 2-3 weeks, we've seen some $2.5 billion delta happen in India equities, while money still not come back in bonds. How this sustains, where this sustains, what is the quantum of money we get back is very, very important for us to watch out for, because that will be the key driver of rupee in our view. Apart from the fact that, of course, most of the overvaluation is done away with, rear is at around 101, 101.5 levels, and CNY has not moved much. So CNY-INR is on a stable footing, on a favorable footing at the current juncture. So that's from the flows front. Of course, apart from that, money is also moving not just to European and Japanese equities, but also into gold. With central banks, the estimate by World Gold Council is last 3 consecutive years, 1,000 tons every year, central banks have bought gold reserves. That's the kind of shift has happened. But flows uncertainty remains. When it comes to emerging markets, including India, is a key factor we are watching out as a research house. So then, of course, we've looked at the channels of impact. So then what is our net conclusion on India? So as we stated, and of course, the R word, the recession word was already spoken about by the previous panelists. So the segment on the left just talks about the channels of impact. So global growth is likely to slow down. IMF is talking about 100 bips slowdown in growth for both US and China, the two biggest losers in the current framework, even though China has held its ground till now because they're so powerful in terms of their manufacturing progress and how they actually sit on the table. When do they sit on the same table and discuss? If they don't do that, recession is likely, and 100 bips slowdown in global growth is likely to weigh on India's growth as well by 30 basis points. So we are calling for a 6% growth in India this year from 6.3 last year. Of course, there are cushioning factors, which is oil price. If it stays in the $65 range, 60, 65, even 65, $70 range, it is likely to be a positive from India's perspective. But the chart on the right, the table on the right is showing that for India, in the global goods trade chessboard, of course, we are a small player, so the impact may be cushioned, even though US does have 18% share in India's exports, and in imports, there's a 6% share. But what is key is how our software services sector plays out, because their guidance is coming under pressure, and 50 to 60% of our software service exports go to the US. And this is one area where since COVID, we've seen a very sharp upswing. Not just software services, even remittances, which have touched $100 billion consecutively for last 2 years. Here also, US is enjoying 25-30% share. So US growth slowdown is likely to have a bearing on India, not just from goods trade perspective, but also from services and remittances perspective. So, which is why, in our view, we are calling for growth slowdown, 6% growth this year compared to 6.3, 6.4% in FY25. We are calling for nominal growth coming down. It may slip below the 10% mark this year. And that's a concern for banks as well. And in our view, some offsetting happens via RBI, which will be heavy lifting growth with rate cuts, more liquidity. But what needs to be watched out for is how India actually forges that trade deal with the US. And apart from that, how India actually is able to define how India is actually able to define its relationships. It's a very, very fragile and delicate area of geopolitics and defines it with China as well at the current juncture. Thanks, I'll leave it there. Thanks a lot, sir, for this opportunity. Really grateful.
Thank you, Kanika. That your presentation was full of facts, and each of the aspects, you have covered very extensively. That sectoral analysis also very, very useful, which we intended as part of our webinar. And your presentation was really, and how in terms of the chessboard, our exports, imports are as a percentage, country-wise, how we are connected. As you rightly said, in China has a very positive, what you call, trade balance with us. And our imports are very, very large and exports are very limited. So these are all likely now we need to, just like America, what is they are doing, even though we have to necessarily look at that. China, the US, where we have a very favorable balance of our what you call trade positive with this tariff, how that will become, that is to be again examined. So these are all for short period, it is to be seen. And as you rightly mentioned, the oil price now, when the global economic demand is coming down, that has been a very favorable for us. And as you rightly said, it is a favorable for inflation also. And it is a less than $60 per barrel. It's a very good proposition for us. So with this, I now go to yet another very young and energetic Jannavi Singh. She is the, what you call, in the economic and research department of Exim Bank. That matter, Exim Bank has all young only, young and energetic, including the chairman, Madam Harsha Bangari, and the two MDs. So the Exim Bank has been very pioneer in the international trade, in getting a lot of lines for India, as well as helping other less developed countries to give our line of credit to them. And with Jannavi, she has been in the this Department of Research and Development, and she has been in the alumni of Jawaharlal Nehru University. She specializes in the economic analysis related to exports and international trade. With this, can I call Janaviji? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, sir, firstly, thank you very much. I think, yeah, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So, firstly, for us at Exim Bank, international trade is both our mandate as well as our bread and butter. So, we were set up in 1982 to finance, facilitate, and promote exports from the country. Just to give you a brief idea of firstly what is happening in international trade, in Indian trade, and then I'll come to the impact of US tariff itself. So 2024 was actually a very, very strong year for global trade. We saw good growth rates coming in. And for the first time since 2017, actually, global trade growth in terms of volumes outpaced the global GDP growth. So, in the sense that trade had once again emerged as a driver of economic growth globally. If you look at India as well, on services side, of course, we have been strong. We have a comparative advantage in terms of our IT services and including and in recent period, we are also seeing a lot of growth in business services as well, with a lot of global capability centers being set up in the country. So, if we look at the performance of India's exports in the previous year, merchandise it has been typically a pain point for us because that is where our trade deficit comes from. Last year, on an overall level, merchandise exports grew by marginally 0.1%. But if we look at the non-gems and jewelry and non-petroleum product segment, we registered a 7.5% growth. Now, this is a strong growth rate, and this is an important figure. Why? Because these non-gems and jewelry, non-petroleum products exports are the exports that add resilience to our exports basket. So they are less prone to commodity shocks, they are less prone to demand shocks, and they add some sort of a resilience to our exports basket. So that is how trade was going last year. Then came the tariff announcements and the uncertainty environment. So the IMF uncertainty index is 7 times higher presently than it was in October 2024. Now, any sort of uncertainty, any sort of risks are also, also impinge on trade growth overall also. So definitely we are seeing downward revisions on many counts in terms of GDP growth, in terms of trade growth after a very, very good year that we have. So coming to the trade war, I mean, the protectionist measures that have been announced by the US itself. So the protectionist trend had been going on since quite some time, The China, even there was a diversification effort from companies, from institutions, from businesses to move away from China, to move from other geographies. And we have quite a bit of experience now on how the geopolitical dynamics work, how does protectionism play out. And what we have seen is that all said and done, US will remain the largest consumer in the world, and China will remain the largest producer in the world. The protectionist measures, what they do at best is it gets rerouted through other countries. So what we saw over the recent period is a lot of connector economies. So we call them connector economies. A lot of connector economies have come up. Now these are countries like a lot of other people also mentioned are Vietnam and Mexico. So these countries over the recent period, since the protectionist trends have gained forward, they have received a lot of imports, a lot of investments from China, and alongside their exports to the US has increased. So what is happening is that the production is being rerouted through these geographies, but the fact remains that China remains the largest producer and will remain for the foreseeable future. Moving services is still easy. Moving manufacturing out of countries is a Herculean task. You cannot move large manufacturing, large industries out of China into the US overnight. It is at best a medium term and realistically a long term plan if anyone is planning to move manufacturing to the US. So having said that, what we are going to see is that the realignments that we saw, initially and also since the pandemic of reshoring, nearshoring, China plus one, these will continue to play out. Also, a lot of countries have now started to sign, negotiate trade deals, not sign at this stage, but negotiate trade deals, including India. According to some statements, around 75 countries have approached the US seeking a trade deal. So how that eventually pans out, how the tariffs would eventually pan out, that really determines where will the comparative advantage lie. Currently, what we can say for certain is the biggest injury will be to the US consumer, because if the tariffs are going up, especially against China, the inflation is expected to go up. The growth will also be impacted. So that is, US consumers are actually the most hit at this point. And that would also impact discretionary spending, which would impact exports from sectors like gems and jewelry, which have a lot of exposure to the US market. So these sectors, which are usually having a lot of discretionary spending, there of course it will be impacted. Services, where we are very strong. Now, more on the services part rather than the merchandise part. We are not a merchandise exporter. We are a merchandise importer. We have been running a trade deficit, and which is not really a bad thing. We are a growing economy. We need capital goods. We need investment goods to grow. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but from an exports perspective, from a trade surplus perspective.
1 meter. Zoom is not responding.
Some issue.
Okay. हाँ नहीं no time है तो देवी
नहीं कुछ हुआ नहीं है
हाँ नहीं कुछ नहीं हुआ है नहीं you continue madam, that's simply it is.
Okay.
Continue.
So I was mentioning, so services is where we may get hit. We have a lot of export. US is the largest market for us. So services is where we do see a lot of hit coming in. And last year, in fact, our services trade surplus had increased quite a lot, and that had actually lent some balance to the greater trade deficit that we also saw on the merchandise front. Coming to the depreciation part that was spoken about earlier. So, US currency depreciating, emerging markets economy having an appreciating trend over the short term, because I don't think INR is a depreciating currency. We all know that over the long period it is a depreciating currency. So any trend that is on appreciation side, it will be like a short term trend only. But if you look at the impact from exports per se, conventional wisdom suggests that a depreciation of the currency should improve exports, while an appreciation of the currency should hit exports. That is the conventional wisdom that we hear of. What is that? So we recently did a long-term research on India's exports. And what our analysis, so now the study is out in the public domain, it's on a website. It was released by the Secretary Department of Financial Services this week in an event in Delhi. So our research indicates that appreciation of the currency, of the Indian currency, actually has a positive impact on exports volumes from the country. Now the reason for this is that Indian exports are import intensive in nature. Indian manufacturing that is export oriented is import intensive in nature. So you take, for instance, our top segments, petroleum products. We don't have any crude oil. We import it, we process it into petroleum products, and we export it. Gems and jewelry. We do a lot of polished diamonds, but we don't have diamonds there. We import it, we process it, and then send it. So a lot value added. So a lot of our exports are actually of that nature. It's import intensive in nature. So so that might explain why that when the rupee appreciates, exporters may be able to squeeze their margins and reduce the impact. So that is something that has come up in the research, and it's quite interesting. But as our portfolio diverses in terms of exports, which we are seeing over the period, this trend might become less prominent. Also, on account of the two giants that we're talking about, US and China, one more thing I would like to highlight is that US is currently our largest exporting partner. We have around 18% of our exports in terms of merchandise goes to the US, and China is our largest importing partner. We are doing a lot of diversification of our exports. So it remains concentrated. So our 52% of our exports are concentrated in the top 10 countries. But we are increasingly diversifying. So if you see the figures from last year, a lot of African countries, a lot of Latin American countries, countries like Benin, countries like Colombia, there our exports have grown by double digit. If you look at the economic survey, there is a very nice chart that has been presented there by DGCIS, where it takes up the key products and tells the new markets that Indian companies have entered into over the previous year, which they could not do earlier. So these diversifications, again, we are hopeful to some extent they may cushion the impact. But of course, the fact remains that the largest consumer is the US, and definitely that would impact. But we are hoping that some sort of diversification helps and imparts more resilience to our exports basket. At Exim Bank, what we are also trying to do in terms of supporting exporters tap new markets is something called a trade assistance program. So I'd like to just briefly talk about it a little bit, because it is particularly for tapping high risk markets. So trade assistance program. So we provide credit enhancement to trade instruments, enhancing the capacity of domestic commercial banks to undertake trade transactions in risky geographies. So since we have been very active in Africa, in Latin America, these risky markets for quite some time, we have a risk appetite on these overseas banks. We know these banks very well. So we came up with this program. It was launched in 2022. We have already supported around $3 billion of incremental exports under this program, which would not have happened without the support from Exim Bank. Another area where we are seeing a lot of interest and potential coming up is the e-commerce space.
E-commerce.
Now the de minimis that have been removed for China makes e-commerce exports costlier from China. Now this was a very, very prominent mode for Chinese suppliers to tap the US market. This creates an opportunity for Indian small players. Now, as it was being talked about earlier, we cannot produce in large scale at very short interval, short in the short term. We need to ramp up our export production capacities. But small exports, micro players, small players, they can really tap into the e-commerce space. Firstly, it has low entry barriers. So it's easier for an MSME to start exporting through the e-commerce mode. So we are seeing that e-commerce may come up as a very important segment, especially with the restrictions coming up in China. And India can really capitalize on that. And Indian government is also now thinking of e-commerce export hubs and related mechanisms to smoothen the e-commerce export space as well. And in the export promotion mission that was announced in this budget also, there's a lot of focus on MSME exporters, there's a lot of focus on e-commerce exporters. Just to put again some numbers into perspective, 5,000 Indian companies account for 80% of India's exports.
Oh.
When we talk about 40% of India's exports are from MSMEs, we have to be careful because it's not MSME companies. We say MSME related products account for 40% of India's exports.
Right.
But it's not just the small players that are supplying those MSME related products. It's even the larger players as well. We do not have a sector restrictions anymore, wide scale sector restriction that restricts a large company from supplying those products. So the thing is that although there are 4 lakh exporters today, 5,000 only are accounting for 80% of our exports. There's a long tail that we can tap. And that is what the government is currently focusing on, to tap those MSMEs, to tap those e-commerce exporters and take them to a stage where they can start tapping the international market. So that's all from my end, sir.
Very, very good. Very good. Yeah, big hand. So, yes. On it. Thank you, Janvi. You are very simple and very straightforward, direct coverage. Is I really appreciate. No major complication words भी नहीं है, कुछ नहीं है. And later abroad also. Everywhere there is a positively. You are put the facts, and there is an opportunity. And as you rightly said, 5,000 contributing to 80%, and whereas the overall is more than 4 lakh. So if each one of them rise and take this opportunity now, our exports can go much, much larger. And the government is also taking a lot of policy fronts in terms of free trade and all that, So we must look at this opportunity. And you have said this, especially on e-commerce and trade assistance for expanding newer markets, and overall the government recent changes and all. So I am very glad that even though somebody who is layman in this international trade has been able to understand very well through your presentation. Now I have my very good friend and also my guide, and we have been looking at his leadership, Mr. Prabir Roy, who has been also supporter of ENQUBE, or he is a part of the ENQUBE in giving us guidance right from the 2020, and he's part of all our program. But he himself is a very big, he is the promoter of Paymate and a leading B2 company, B2B fintech company. And he's also the independent director, audit committee chairman of Nazara Technology. All of you know, this is the one of the only listed company. And also it is a unicorn. And in that company also he is associated, and he's also associated in the MSME community also. There is a organization in Noida where he's the chairman of that also. So in a way, he's a opinion maker and talk. He's in almost, and today in the Wave program, which is being, entertainment industry. Their stall was visited by Prime Minister, Nazara Technology. So I saw that also. So with that, I wanted particularly from the current our IT exports and all, how that is likely to have an impact, because as earlier mentioned, they are not given a very positive guidance. Now, as they rightly said, and that innovation and creativity should come even at the bigger company. So, Prabir Roy Saab, we are looking at your considered opinion on this whole US tariffs. Please do come here. I. Sir. Start. Yes, sir.
Hi, thanks, Dr. Narendra and all my colleagues in this hall here, seminar hall. I was looking at the program earlier and I found up all the speakers. I think all of us have heard a lot about from economists and all financial analysis was the part of the panel. I am neither, though I've trained as an economist. But of course, Dr. Narendra is a friend, and we have been working together in various leadership forums and in trying to popularize some of the subjects which don't get attention normally, AI, small businesses, fintech, etc. But now it's picking up thanks to some of these sessions. So, I look at it from a business hat mainly because I straddle the digital space quite a lot. For me, any crisis is an opportunity. Frankly speaking, any crisis is an opportunity for me. Any businessman or any marketer looks to make the most hay when this part of the sun shines. So I don't look at tariffs from America in a negative perspective. In fact, I think there'll not be much impact on India. Why is that? Because our tariff is 25% that they've imposed on us. We are just a little ahead of Japan, Korea, Malaysia, who are at 24. We are 25. Most of the other companies on the list go down right up to 135% tariff for China. So we are affected relatively and marginally less. Secondly, is that everybody talks about trade. When you talk about trade, it's all about goods and services. So if you look at our trade, total volume, I think in India is 1 trillion. I think the total global imports and exports, our total.
Yeah, we have a plan to take 2 trillion.
Our total exports, I think, are 200 billion. More than that? 800 billion. No, total export and import is about total. Look at, I think your exports are, I think, about 776. No, you're not getting my question. Exports I'm talking about. So exports is not 776. Imports and exports. C is equal
that only,
C plus I plus G plus X minus M.
Our country has kept a target of 2 trillion.
Yeah.
By 2030.
Yes, at the moment.
So anyway, coming to the point is out of that services is a large part of it. So services is not impacted by tariffs, right? And out of that services, I think about 60, 70 billion, 36% only goes to the US and the rest goes to the rest of the world. So in the entire composite of goods and services, you will find that services dominate with us in the US and that's not affected. Karan is there and he will have better statistics, which I hope he doesn't ask right now. But having said that, what are the opportunities I see before us? And doctor was asking what's the impact on digital. Narendra Modi was saying yesterday that I don't want to see India playing games. I want to see Indian companies make the games. So as of today, I found that Xbox, which is a Sony company, has 22 video games made in India, an Indian themes, an Indian story. And out of that, totally about 120 games are from India, which are bought by Microsoft, Minecraft, Xbox, Sega, Nintendo, everybody. So this was zero a few years back. So it's not that we are playing all the famous games and none of the games are Indian IPs. Right now, a lot of the Indian IPs of gaming has come up quite a lot. So in India, we are now making games also, and that's the big market to cater locally and domestically for that. So I think digital is a very important thing. Secondly, is that Nouriel Rubini said that the tariffs is a good thing for America. Why did he say that? He says the next 10 years, 10 of the 12 leading industries and sectors are all going to be where America has an advantage, mainly all technology, AI, semiconductors, etc. So he says because of that US will circumvent tariffs and they will continue to drive trade, and maybe tariffs may be more country specific. For example, India, you have a 25%, maybe with the bilateral trade agreement, you might have negotiate separate rates, which will be better. Same, I suspect, will happen in China. Just push people into negotiating better trade terms with the US and other parts of the world where US has got a trade deficit. In fact, US has a trade deficit anywhere across. Not only they have a current account deficit, they also have a trade deficit, which is quite a significant percentage of their GDP. But as any economist knows that trade is dependent on what Ricardo used to call the comparative advantage, that countries trade with each other. Why? Because one country makes one product much cheaper than the other country. So even if the other country makes it, you trade, and that is why you have the relative advantage of competitive trade. Now, one country builds barriers against that to tariff and non-tariff barriers, then obviously you're penalizing whom? Yes, you're penalizing the suppliers from other countries, sure. You're penalizing your own consumers. Why? The same product, they're going to buy it at a higher price. If in the US case, you are overloading on debt at an individual level and at the corporate level and at the country level, their debt to GDP is quite high. Individual loans and credit in the US is very high. So what will happen if you want to buy something which has been imported at a higher price, you are going to overload on your own credit and your own debt obligation that you're going to build up, which is not good. Secondly, is that it leads to inflation, which is the US has been able to bring it down after several years. Now it's doing well. I mean, I think the inflation rate is down. The Fed has cut back the rate increases. It's neutral now, ready to go up or down depending on how it goes. Job losses. Now, not that all companies will, after, you went through an entire cycle of offshoring and outsourcing for last 20 years. Suddenly, overnight, you have to go for insourcing and onshoring. So that's a huge change in your supply chain management, which I think Kanaka and Janvi spoke about, the backward forward integration of supply chains, which the world has built over such 20 years, mainly with China and Asian countries. In the US case, it's Mexico, Canada, China, and Asian countries. That whole thing is disrupted. Now, overnight, you can't build capabilities in semiconductors. Overnight, you cannot build capabilities in automotive manufacturing. Overnight, you cannot build capacity in pharma, which America needs, but they have gone the cheaper route and they've outsourced it. Now, overnight, they cannot bring it back and build it at the same scale and capacity. It needs a lot of capex. It needs time. It needs skilled people. It needs talent. It needs capital, venture capital to start those. And all those sunset industries have gone. So to rebuild and reskill is going to take some time. So there's going to be a disruption. So I think that is one downside for them on the tariffs. But overall, I believe the tariffs India will be okay. In fact, we see opportunities. I think the lady before me was talking about the big opportunity in SMEs and e-commerce. Now, e-commerce is big, but the government of India is trying to prevent Chinese supplies from dominating Indian e-commerce supplies, because they've dominated Alibaba and all those companies, Chinese suppliers, because of the cost. They dominate as suppliers on Flipkart and Amazon in India. So when you buy it, it's actually buying from a Chinese company. So you need to de-risk and mitigate that and build capacity in your own supply chain through MSMEs. Yes, that 5-10% cannot dominate. It has to be the 67 million MSMEs. 30 million should be working on producing widgets for supply to Indian market as well as to the American markets. Not take from China, order it here, and then send it to USA. That's just a rerouting of, and therefore if you're saying exports to US is 18%, but my imports from China are also 18%, means that you're just rerouting through a third party, which is convenient. You bypass tariff laws. And that was the plan even for Vietnam getting very high tariff rates, because China was relocating into Vietnam, hoping to use a third country which is safer for them. That they've raised the rates of the Vietnamese tariffs. So obviously it's coming to India, hopefully. BYT will come to India. I was in the meeting yesterday. NVIDIA is going to come to India. There are already 4-5 semiconductor companies which are going to set up plants in India. A lot of the other auto guys are also coming back to India, mainly because tariffs have made it uneconomical for them to supply directly to America. So they're using any third party country which has a low tariff rate to reroute their production capacity, even if it means rebuilding their capacity in India. Now, all iPhones of USA are going to be made in India. The rest will go from China. So that's an opportunity for us. So I think that's one way out. And so building our own capacities is the opportunity I see, and whether we can and will is anybody's guess. Frankly speaking, we have not been able to exploit the opportunity which we had the last 10 years. For example, in COVID, there was a huge opportunity to dominate pharma and healthcare products because all was coming from other countries. But in the last 5 years, I don't know whether we have increased capacity to dominate that, continue to dominate, or China and other countries have really maximized the opportunity and continue to sell healthcare products and services and accessories to the Western countries. If we had taken it up there, even till today, gloves, syringes, capsules, body suits, all APIs should have been insourced into India and then exported to other countries, and China would have lost a little bit of advantage on that. I suspect it's flipped back to those countries which were dominant before COVID and probably regain their dominance. So, though I say in every crisis there's an opportunity, I wish we are able to grab these opportunities. I know in the digital space where I'm involved with, in gaming and esports and fintech, India is number one. It's a global hub in fintech. Hopefully, we are an Asian hub for gaming. And in time, we will have more gaming companies and digital companies coming out from India, which will have a global footprint. In the other sectors, yes, I'm sure we will be able to do a lot of new things in electronics, electronic components, semiconductors, pharma, textile machinery. But it's going to take some time, and we have to be focused and really have a determined approach rather than a knee-jerk approach where we quickly do a rerouting or arbitrage and then go back to older ways of working with no change in the structure of the industry, the business models, the price points, the skilling, the talent, the IPs. All these are very much important factors to continue to sustain and dominate in any sector, not just take from X and Y price and then sell it at delta X to somebody else without building that capacity. That's just arbitrage play. There's enough of trading. India is a country of traders and UK is a nation of shopkeepers. But we have to move those models. UK is where it is because it is a nation of shopkeepers. They've lost all the capabilities. US was in danger of becoming similar country dependent on supplies from other parts of the world. US was top in automobiles, electronics, semiconductors, computers, mobiles, high tech. All those capacities have been lost over the last 20, 30 years, right? So they are trying to regain it. So Trump's move is not to bridge the deficit or to make money. His thing is to regain strategic objective, to have America's defense forces, its automakers, which was the mainstay of the American economy of jobs, to bring it all back again into America, even if he has to pay a price for it. His logic is we can't be dependent on third party, and if that third party is someone who's not of necessarily a friend of ours, then that's more the reason we have to be more cautious. Just for example, you might think that Russia and America are not the best of friends, but American imports from Russia are 4 times what Russia imports from the United States. So see, this is how it's gone a bit wonky, and I hope this tariff thing is though is an opportunity. There may not be an impact in India so much, and I think enough numbers have been talked about, a percentage of exports, imports to GDP, and services as percentage of total exports. But in manufacturing, probably we should be able to do, come back with something in some of the heavy engineering side. But other than that, uh, I don't see any material difference happening going forward. So with this small, rather high-level view, because enough statistics you guys have heard, and so I didn't want to get into that. And I'd be happy to take any questions from this room anybody has. I can answer right now, or from anyone on the
Yeah, one
panel.
more speaker is there.
Yeah.
After that,
Yeah,
yes,
sure.
yes.
Like everybody's probably all the speakers is saying like we have to expand our capacity, But irrespective of the expansion of capacity, we cannot be cost competitive because of various reasons. Because China is having a capacity of 700, and even if it reach to 50, like per unit cost or whatever way you calculate, beside this, logistic cost is probably one of the highest in the country. So whether this theoretical expansion of capacity within the country and export is really going to make competitive advantage. In general, not related to any specific industry, but yes, in software side, the industry or field, what you are tech side, I agree that we have competitive advantage to go up to a very high level. But traditional manufacturing, brick and mortar industry.
So I'll start from back to front. I'll take technology first. And technology, though you feel that we have a competitive advantage because of our headcount and number of people we can throw at a problem in terms of coders, programmers, analysis, computer professionals. With AI coming in, everybody's saying between 30 to 80% of all future code will be done by AI. It means, what does it mean? Your headcount and bench strength will go down. You won't need 400,000, 500,000 employee companies to write code. If 80% of code is being written by AI, it will disrupt even the services, the technology model. Right now, whether we are going to in India be able to adapt and pivot around that question mark, I'm sure the tech guys being in the private sector, they'll figure something out. How to continue to remain relevant without losing the advantage that they've had for 25 years. Now, coming to your manufacturing question, I think you raise a very relevant point. Overnight, you cannot build capacity. Overnight, you cannot quickly come back and be the least cost producer. Overnight, you cannot regain your competitive advantage, differentiation. It's very difficult. Even if you say chips will be made in India, chip making and fabless plants take 10, 15 years to incubate. Right. So, yes, you build a plant. Doesn't mean tomorrow morning you start supplying. So it takes time. And these are all heavy capital intensive industries. They need high skill, high talent, high skill laborers. So again, that will take time. So overnight, you will find that to regain competitive advantage and be the least cost producer in some of these things we hope we should become because of the tariff is easier said than done. But as I said in the beginning, every crisis is an opportunity, and I feel that the MSME sector and even large companies, if they're quick and adaptable and versatile, definitely they can make an impact. And maybe in some sectors and segments, we may be able to do that fast. Not in all at one point of time, but yes, opportunities. The sectors, if you say strategy, at least two, three, if you can manage, I think that's a great track record. So that's where the opportunity is. Now, whether you grab it, how fast to grab it before Vietnam grabs it, Thailand grabs it, Malaysia grabs it, Sri Lanka grabs it, Taiwan grabs it, Mexico re-grabs it, Canada renegotiates. That is the art of the deal. And that's the art of how you move fast in a very, very dynamic world, which we know is changing absolutely minute to minute, frankly.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank
One
you.
more
Thanks,
speaker. Thank you very
Narendra.
much, sir. You
And,
be here, sir, sometime.
yeah.
The last speaker will be
Okay.
only last speaker.
Thank you.
Prabir Roy, sir. And in the overall contest, as well as the specific, including pharmaceuticals or even in the semiconductor or the chips, all that, you have covered. And as he rightly said, every country will look at how to make the challenge as an opportunity, how to reposition each of the country in terms of not only US, all other countries in terms of their exports. And India continue to do that. And as overnight competitiveness or our improving our capabilities, all that may not be, but at the same time, India, whenever has faced with the challenge, they have come out very successfully. So that 1991, whatever India faced resulted in a bigger reforms. That benefit we got for quite a long time. And as you also covered, Janave, that land, labor, land, or other areas, some big reforms are also were expected, and India should take that advantage in bringing and facilitating more in terms of operational efficiency or ease of doing business. Then wider coverage, as we rightly said earlier, also that wider coverage, and even a small beginner in terms of export, how he can take advantage. So wherever our uniqueness is there and our DNA is there, definitely the benefit is always little medium and longer. And otherwise, if we are also me too product, then no, you will not be able to re-establish yourself. So America or China as a two trading blocks, we also will have to say that we are none too less. That is the should be the strategy, and looking all along with the government is not the right step. So because everybody does industry for a business for a commercial purpose, so he has to look at changing dynamics, how he will make it much more impactful for himself, and he not only survives but he excels. That is the important. Now I am sorry, Adish ji, aapka we have taken little longer in terms of our coverage. Adish Verma is no, he's a from the CRISIL, and CRISIL has given a lot of economics to the industry as well as self. CRISIL has a big role in bringing a lot of reports. Mr. Our Dharmakirti Joshi, Deepthi Deshpande, and Adish Verma, all of them have come in my all programs, both on webinar, on the physical, and they have been kind enough. And I've been always appreciating, while all rating agency reports are also valued, CRISIL has its own value, and S&P. So with that, Adish ji, आपका you are one of the very upcoming research, and you are currently senior economist. Then you will rise up to the director level. With this, my wish, I want you to cover your area of from the CRISIL view as well as your personal view on this particular subject. Yes, Adish
Right.
ji.
Good evening, sir. Narendraji. Thank you so much, first of all, for all your kind words. And my apologies. I have a bit of a bandwidth issue, so I not be
Oh,
able to put on
that's why
my
I could not see. Yeah, okay. You
camera.
cover. Yes.
Uh, and I think see again I think speaking at the end in a panel having so many distinguished people leaves you with a lot less to talk about because most of the things have been spoken about. But I'll still, I think also, I'll try to talk about one area which I believe has not got much attention so far, and I'll try to keep it brief, and which is about the trade complementarity between India and US. Because I think a lot of people have already spoken about what are the kind of exporting sectors which are going to face some challenges. But I think if we look at this whole premise of the US tariffs, or the rise in reciprocal tariffs which the US has put, I think their main endeavor is to bring down their trade deficit with other countries.
Correct.
So now, and in the current scenario, where India is trying to negotiate a deal with US, so I think the objective is that what are the areas where India can increase its imports from the US for this trade deficit to be sort of bridged. So I think in that sense, when I look at the data, I think what I see is that if we look at if we want to establish the trade complementarity, I think what we need to see is that what are the goods that India imports from the world, and what are the goods that US exports to the world. And we are strictly, talking about just the merchandise parts here, though we know that the bilateral trade agreement which is being discussed has a lot of other parameters like the IP protection issues and the government procurement issues, things like that. But I think we are strictly talking about what are the likely products where we can see some kind of increase in imports from India to India from the US. And this is also, I think, I feel one is that this has hardly got any attention so far, and also I think this is important to look at this aspect because one is that we are fearing dumping from China because of the high tariffs that US has imposed on China. But also because China is the only country which has retaliated back with an a significantly high tariff on US. So I think a lot of US exports might also have to be diverted to the international markets, and India might have to sort of come into play to agree to sort of import some of them. Now, when I look at the top items which India imports from the world and the top items that US exports, I think they're largely about 33% of goods where we see some complementarity, wherein, in the sense that where there's a potential for India to increase its imports from the US. Now, interestingly, the two of the items there are one is your crude petroleum, which is India's biggest import item, and also that is the US's biggest export item. So clearly there is an complementarity there. And second is the gold, which is also again one of India's biggest import items, and also US exports quite a bit of gold. But when we look at the numbers, and I'm talking about the 2024 export import data, what we see is that the amount of oil imports that India had in 24, which was about 143 billion, uh, and the kind of exports that US had of oil, petroleum crude in 24 was only about 118 billion. So basically, India's import requirement of crude oil is much bigger than what US is currently exporting. Which means that either US will have to increase its export substantially to sort of be able to export to India, or India will have to maybe import less from some of its other importing partners, and if it has to sort of import more from the US. I think other area where which is to be highlighted, I think, is the agriculture, where US is a big player in some of the commodities like soybean and maize, and where I think it is also trying to push some of the agri exports to India. But if we really look at India's imports, we hardly import these items, so we really don't really need these products. So if we have to sort of import more of these, I think it will just be just for the heck of it. So but I think where we do see some important complementarity playing out is in some semiconductor parts where India is a large importer and also US is a large exporter of these items. So complementarity is basically dominated by the energy sector, which is your crude oil, liquefied natural gas, and liquefied propane. I think these are the items where US is a big exporter and also India is a big importer. Then I think there are certain items where India is a big importer, but US hardly exports them, which are one is coal. Then there are certain mobile part imports, which clearly US doesn't export. I think India depends on China on most of them. And then diamonds, the rough diamonds are also one of the products which India imports quite a bit, but again, US doesn't really export them. So I think I just sort of brought these to sort of highlight some of the commodities where India may be prepared or will have to sort of be prepared to get greater imports from India, from the US. Uh, I think maybe in the interest of time, I'll also just briefly touch upon some positive aspects that India currently has in the form of some of the buffers that India has in such a situation. One is that, as Janvi also spoke about, we have a very diversified export market. I think after China, India has the highest export market diversification if we go by the HHI index calculation in the whole of Asian region. So that sort of makes India a little less vulnerable. In any case, I think India's exports to US share is about 2%, which is not very high, as has already been talked about. So India can sort of has some advantage there. Then I think one of the clear fallouts of the U.S. tariff action as is that India is going to import a lot of disinflation, and which is positive from the monetary policy support point of view in India, because growth is going to get slightly badgered, and inflation is going to remain under control. So there is a lot of room for the monetary policy to continue to provide its support by way of rate cuts, and some of that has already started happening, and more is expected. Then I think India's balance sheet remain happy, both of the corporate balance sheet, which are deleveraged. So I think they are in a better position to undertake investment when an opportune time comes. And also, I think India's banking system remains healthy, with the NPAs coming down significantly over the last couple of years. The external sector vulnerability is also quite low. So one, as earlier panelists have already spoken about, the crude oil prices have nosedived, and that is something which is a good from India's macro perspective, both from inflation and trade deficit perspective, because it's India's top import item. And another is on the services exports part, where we have already talked about that it has currently not come under the tariff under the line of tariff fire, and India has sort of increased the share of its services exports from only about 30% in fiscal 2012 to almost around 48% in fiscal 2025. So that itself makes India, provides India a lot of cushion in this turbulent times where goods exports are expected to face hits. I think I would just like to end by sharing the example of India's recent historical period of 2013-14, when India was actually called a fragile five country, where India's external vulnerability was quite high. And we saw that the episodes of taper tantrum, how it impacted our currency so significantly. There was a lot of devaluation happening overnight. Because our external situation was very bad, our CAD was very high, our inflation was high, our growth was low. I think in all these parameters currently we are doing very well. So I think our vulnerability to withstand this shock has improved significantly over the last many years. So again, I think I'll end by saying that yes, this is a time of uncertainty, but I think opportunity is also there, because world is going to be looking for alternatives to China to circumvent the high tariffs that US has put on China. And as Mr. Prabir Roy was pointing out, how well we can capitalize on this is up to us. So I think I'll end there and pass it back to you, Narendraji. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adish. That there are certain questions. You are there, Kanika is there, as well as here our Jannav is there. So somebody has asked that are we going to be a good what you call cost supplier, costless means not high cost, or are we going to be a strategic supplier? Who would like to answer that? You can come here. Huh? Yes. Are we going to be a strategic supplier or a niche player with the lower cost and all?
So, of course, cost advantage is there in India as compared to several other geographies. But, costs in general would be escalating. Like on account of the tariffs, tariffs would be a major cost being added to the entire, price point for exporters. So, as I was mentioning, there are 75 countries that are currently approached.
Around 90 countries there.
Yeah, US, and they are trying to negotiate a trade deal. So, at what point the tariffs finally end? That will be something that we have to see. But most of the products that we are currently supplying, it's quite diversified in the sense that we also supplying textiles, where price point is crucial, where cost is crucial. We are also supplying products like engineering goods, where it is not that price sensitive as textile. So it depends. It's a fair mix of what we supply to the US.
So
Yeah,
one
I
more
think
Sir,
question.
just
Yeah.
sorry, just to add a small point, I think we should also keep in mind that we should also be thinking in terms of the value chains, because it is not that whatever India is going to export is going to be fully manufactured in India and exported from India. So I think
Correct.
our idea is that India should be aiming to integrate more in the global value chain, which it so far has not done. And in that view, I think how much value add happens in India is what one should be looking at,
Correct.
and thinking about the different products. Thank you.
Yes, that's why Janvi also earlier, even diamond jewelry that we import, but we do the value added, and that has to be seen. Some of the imports are, even in oil, we do the import and export.
Yeah.
So that value addition and our unique product of that will always have a, particularly in the luxury segment in as far as diamond jewelry, we will have our share. So another important some question here, in the that earlier, no, Mr. Our Sanjay Mariwala talked about one is US block, another is China block, and another is wall, towards the wall. So somebody has asked where the EU will be there, European Union.
My guess, at least my guess would be on the wall, but
Huh?
I would be, my guess would be on the wall, but
On the wall.
yeah.
Acha. Come here.
You saw the mail from Commissioner of Europe. So they are very clear that they want to work with the USA. But if it comes to fight, then
I know. That is why they have refrained from retaliation.
yeah.
So earlier they thought, and that kept in abeyance, because ultimately that Western, all that, no, they are always together, and there are strategic in the geopolitical front also.
No, all different.
Their US help is always needed. They cannot separate the US. So that is the one question. As you said, then somebody has written again, third angle to be seen about what are our positives and what are our negatives too. Do we need to find a way between?
That is what government is.
Currently,
Kanika also can answer. Huh? Kanika, you are there? Okay, you answer. Yeah.
currently, I think our positive is that we are actively negotiating a trade deal with
Correct.
the US. And
And
Trump has
we
been,
started before
Yes.
2nd April.
and Trump has been very actively mentioning also that the trade deal with
Yeah,
India.
India, even though he has said India is the highest,
Yeah.
not only on the trade tariffs, but non-trade also. I saw the report, they have listed about 14 areas where India, no, indirectly supports the domestic.
But interestingly, that is the quality control orders and that are mentioned is actually to contain imports from China.
I know, sometimes you cannot
Yeah.
separately say, it has to be in a global context.
Here, what is happening is not just focusing on US. Now, not only Commerce Ministry, Finance Ministry, and Foreign Ministry. So all these people, not only at the ministerial level, even people at the down level, secretarial, deputy secretarial level, these people are going to various countries, started discussing about trade deals.
Yes.
So now we are talking about trade deals with.
It has united and coordinated action.
Europe, UK, Australia, and also individual countries in Europe.
Hmm.
All that is happening.
Yeah, and our another thing, our commerce minister has clearly written, our agreement is not only on trade barriers, means tariff, it is on non-trade also. So there will be a relook, and if you see that wherever he has spoken, he has also stressed on our Indians becoming competitive and innovative. Unique.
You talking competitiveness. I want to tell you already we have one in the case of IT, we are competitive. Second, in terms of telecom services, we are the cheapest.
Hmm.
Third, in terms of production of electronic items, which we have proven in the case of Apple, that we can produce at a cheaper rate. So, Samsung has the largest factory in the world in India. So, if they are going to set up very large factories for all this, we are going to be competitive.
Here, Mr. R. Kannan is speaking. This is a very regular writing on all these areas, and he also sends his various suggestions, not only to World Bank, European Union, everywhere, and it gets acknowledged also, and to our Reserve Bank Finance Minister also. So, good points you covered,
Sir,
and so
yeah.
I think I have. Other than that, Madam, what should we do make our currency appreciating? Requesting your tips. Which Madam will give? Uh,
I think the rupee is already appreciating. So
yes.
thanks
Yeah.
to the weakening dollar. But I don't know if that is something we want. I mean, especially because I think if we go by the fundamental theory of exchange rate, I think as Janvi also pointed out, we are actually supposed to be on a gradually depreciating path, given the difference in our interest rate of India and the advanced world. So I don't know what is the motive behind expecting a appreciating currency on the question.
Okay. Now, I'm very happy that we had quite a lot of other prominent people who were participating in our webinar, and including Rekha Jagannathan was there. Now, our NSBT, that is from the Sambhajinagar, Nipa is there. Then Ranjini Varghese, she is there on the what you call sustainability and on the ESG front. So like that, there are quite a lot of Pradeep Roy there. There are so many others who were there, and we were not able to get them also to talk, but they are also contributors. So the Pradeep Roy has said, with our PMI manufacturing, so of course one area I found that our manufacturing share idea is to reach 25%. Nothing बाद में दिखता नहीं है. But it is a yes, with our PMI manufacturing score having improved, we are there chances we can emerge as the next global manufacturing hub. This has been a very always one, but what happened? No, it is a good thing, but last one our manufacturing share is 13%. It came down from 17. We have to achieve 25 in spite of PLI.
Target has been going on for decades.
Decade.
Decades.
And we have introduced the PLI. PLI may be uska contribution hai. And also we had, of course, Atmanirbhar Bharat means do all the things here and export. That is also again a very, and after that, like toys we have started manufacturing and so that all the idea of our Prime Minister has been very good. And similarly, rural crafts, rural, no any other herbals, rural products, they can all have, and the rural having India brand. That is so. PMI this month, April month has been our GST collection also. Yeah, 2.27 lakhs crores. Yes. Yeah. So, Mr. You kindly come here and give the vote of thanks and conclusion. Come. R. Kannan is the ex-Hinduja and ex-ICICI and ex-TCS. And he's a today in various companies director also. So I request R. Kannan to, he's also part of our ENQUBE. So I would like him to give his concluding remarks and vote of thanks, please. And also we are grateful to Mr. Sunil Mehta is here. There are quite a lot. Harihara Mishra ji, Amara, AARC ka secretary hai. He is there. He is ex-banker, State Bank. Sudeep Mandal is there. I would not have mentioned. So there are so many other friends and Mr. Dang, ICICI Bank. He is there here. And there are others also here. So I appreciate that. My endeavor is to see that we do justice to whatever subject we cover wide variety of views, and so that because this all later it will be in social media, it will have a wider reach, and by that small our humble we are making something for our India's growth. That is my idea, and I'm grateful to my all the backup team, including our Shilpa from A1 Logistics, and here Priyanka and others are also helped me. Now I request Mr.
Yeah.
Yes, Kannan, what's your concluding remark?
Yeah, good evening to all of you. This was really an interesting session. We heard various perspectives from an economy point of view, from industry point of view, from a banker's point of view. So we had all the views today, including views from Exim Bank. They are working very closely with the government on all these trade policies compared to other areas. One good thing is that, as we are all aware, India, there were discussions about manufacturing and all. This week or last week, I think, the government has decided to form a manufacturing council where people from various ministries will be there. Similarly, on this trade deal, it is not just being dealt by Commerce Ministry alone. If you just read closely, follow, you will find that people from almost every ministry, when they go to other countries, they are talking about trade. So we are very, very seriously engaged with not only with the USA, with Europe, with the Middle East, with UK, and with Australia, etc. So, and on top of that, last week we had the sessions of IMF and World Bank. And of all the forecasts they made, if you see the downgrades of for various countries, the least difference compared to the earlier forecast was only for India. The highest difference was for US and China. So that way, India is in a very good position today. Plus, we are also proactively engaging with all other countries in the world. And like all speakers spoke here, I think we'll be able to capitalize these opportunities and emerge winners. And I would like to thank all the speakers who gave their views, valuable time, plus all those who came here itself. Physically, more than 40 people are present today, apart from people who are in the video. So we would like to thank all these people, and I would like to especially congratulate Dr. Narendra sir for conducting such knowledgeable sessions on budget, trade, and other areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have a physical presence of our Janvi Singh, Exim Bank. So on behalf of our ENQUBE collaboration, I take a great pleasure in presenting a book from the Harvard, Everyday Wisdom of Daily Exceptional Leadership. This I gave to that our that flagship program, all the 100 speakers. So I am now giving to you. Come. Sunil, I. Ah, yes, up. Anybody, what is that? Come, just giving, you can stand here. Yeah. Yeah. ये clap ही नहीं आता है क्या है? No, I want all of you to come now. We'll have a group photo. Come. Yeah, we'll have a group photo. Yes, this you took, no? Yeah, please come on, all. Sudeep, aye. Yeah, everybody, please come. Group photo. Yes, come. And there is nothing. Up, aye.
She's carrying books, I'll carry it.
Yes, come. One group photo will take. उधर मुश्किल पड़ेगा. Yeah, इधर आइए. Come, madam, sorry. Come. Yeah, come इधर थोड़ा.
We'll take this.
Yeah, this.
थोड़ा.
Yeah, come. All of you, come.
There is no tariff on claps.
तो आप सब चाह दिया कुछ भी मोमेंटम नहीं आता है, क्या बात है?
Come.
You can keep this back behind.
Yeah, because we need all our presence companies. Amit, you know him, Sunil Mehta.
I
ये कनके में
it's okay.
Amar Naik, correct.
Yeah.
I think both of them also worked hard. Why don't you also come?
Yes.
I'll take a photo. Please come.
Come. Yeah. Let it be record. No.
Yeah, please join.
Priyanka, come. अभी ये पूरा आया नहीं है, थोड़ा
फोटो ले लो।
आई आई
Some of you come inside.
कम आप आओ आओ भाई, अरे आओ यस कम
Then let him also come.
नहीं नहीं आप आई आई
Yeah.
नहीं नहीं वैसे लास्ट में कभी कभी आते नहीं यहाँ इधर है इधर है स्टैंड नियर यस
Why careful?
Open up here, no, because he's the person who has served everybody.
Yeah.
Except that's why everybody is alive.
विश्वनाथ विश्वनाथ
आप इधर आ जाओ सबके बीच में आ जाइए
I think ICICI.
अब थोड़ा
So you are
यंग गर्ल आप आओ ना इधर वही कम कम हियर यस अब अभी आओ सामने आई दोनों सामने आई नहीं वी आर ऑलवेज कम यस आ गया आई
everybody has to look over here. Yeah, I think camera is waiting for people to smile.
वेरी गुड
Thank you.
सबको भेजेंगे ये फोटो
Yes.
करेक्ट
Thank you, sir.
थैंक यू